Garden permit area, the Foothill permit area, the tree streets, which include 800 North and 150 East for time parking, the Joaquin neighborhood, downtown business district, plus downtown area goes from 500 North to 500 South, which includes all of the outlining areas, and we do enforce at the airport when requested. We also daily have 13 elementary schools that we regularly receive calls from concerned parents reporting vehicles parked in school zones, parents double parking, creating hazards that we respond to again daily. Other calls received on a regular basis are for unauthorized vehicles parking in disability stalls at the malls, at the hospital, and other business and public areas. And again, this is a daily response. And on top of all of that, we have regular patrols for parking violations throughout the rest of the city. Having said all of that, we try very, very hard to make an organized and strategic effort on where and when we're going to enforce these areas. Because as you know, the permit areas is 24/7. Foothill, they have the permit during the day. University Garden, it's overnight. So I do have graveyard officers as well as officers that are working the day. Above all that, in our 311, we get calls continuously for abandoned vehicles. The parking officers are the ones that respond to those. They cite those vehicles. They will mark those vehicles. They will come back. If the vehicles are still there, we do send them to the police department for impound.
Those are only on public streets. You don't do anything with private, correct?
In what?
Those are only public streets, nothing to do with private.
Nothing to do with private. As of now, with the new ordinance that went into effect, we do go on city-owned and operated parking lots for the abandoned vehicles. But we have no authority or jurisdiction on any private property other than disability or fire.
What constitutes an abandoned vehicle?
Is what the officer will do. They'll go out and they'll chalk the vehicle. Then they'll go wait at least 72 hours. They'll go out to the vehicle. If the chalk mark is still there, they'll cite the vehicle. Then we'll usually wait a few days just to make sure, and then we will put that orange sticker on the vehicle saying that it's an abandoned vehicle. If it's not moved at that point, then the police is what will come in to see if it must be.
So I forget the section, but there's one in the code that talks about trucks, and it also includes trailers.
Yes.
And if I remember correctly, in a residential zone, you shouldn't be parking large trucks, and the cutoff is like 18,000 gross
Correct.
weight. And then it mentions trailers, but it specifies like if the trailer is rated over 1.5 tons, which to me is like a 4-wheel, double axle. And I see some of those just always parked. I know where one's been for 10 years.
Right now, the trucks, we go out and we will mark them, and we can issue a citation every 2 hours for one of those trucks parked in the neighborhoods if they're off the truck routes. For the trailers, the only authority that we have is to mark them as abandoned vehicles. So we do go out and chalk the tires and treat it just like any motorized vehicle on the street.
So it would need a complaint, basically, to come in and say, this trailer has been here more than 72 hours?
Yes, but in the regular patrol, if the officers are saying, that the vehicle isn't moved due to cobwebs or debris on the street or anything like that, we do actively chalk them if we're in a neighborhood, especially if we've had one complaint in a neighborhood. The officers are instructed to go, kind of in the whole block to make sure that it's not the only one. Okay, I'll turn the time over to Laramie.
Good afternoon. I'm Laramie Gonzalez. I'm the business analyst for 311 Customer Service. And now to the meat of why we're here today with this proposal. Why a new fee structure is being proposed. Here's some bullet points as to why, and we'll get into them individually in the next few slides. But first, the new law regarding parking fees last year in the legislative session. It's coming up. Parking enforcement operations growth, parking needs and enforcement needed as outlined in the strategic parking management plan. And Provo City's parking violation code has not been modified for over 10 years, and we don't even know when the last time the parking fees were looked at. It was, I couldn't find it even past that, so. So the first one, the city code is non-compliant with the new law. Like I said, the new legislation that was passed takes effect July 1st of this year, 2019. There was House Bill 336 that modifies the assessment of the late fees for parking violations. The new law does not allow for the accumulation of late fees to total more than 25% of the original fee. So I did bring a copy of the House Bill. That's up to you if you want to read it. But the portion that took a little snippet of the portion actually talks about that particular guideline, and I'll read through real quick. Individual assessed a parking citation, civil citation, or administrative fine may not be charged, 1, by the original jurisdiction that imposes the fine, late fees and interest in the aggregate that are more than 25% of the initial fine amount. Currently, Provo City's code states that if any fee is not paid on time and is 6 to 10 days late, the fee due will be double the original amount. And if it's 11 to 15 days, the fee will be triple the original amount. So going forward, our city code would be non-compliant. So that's the first reason we're proposing a new structure in general. The second one is just to keep up with growth. Our parking enforcement operation has expanded a little bit. The focus, we're trying to make some efficiencies there. And the parking enforcement operational needs have grown to meet the demand of parking availability and enforcement as requested by residents and business owners. So it's probably good to note there that a lot of the parking demand or parking enforcement does come from our business owners. They want to make sure that there's parking available for their customers. Can keep that parking cycled, and it's important to them. So I think a lot of people sometimes think that enforcing those parking areas in front of their businesses is a negative for them, because we don't want to make any customers angry. But we want to get everybody an equal chance to frequent those businesses. So, parking needs enforcement needs outlined in the strategic parking management plan. There are a number of things in there, but just things to consider going forward, like additional parking, maybe some additional permitted parking areas. I don't know if Austin has anything to add there with regards to the management plan.
Can I say something, Dave?
Oh, yeah.
One thing I would say with this, that it's important, what the management plan says is that we should have an increasing or graduated fine structure, or someone who's just making a simple mistake on the street, staying too long, doesn't have to pay as much as someone who's done 6, 7 violations. This is something that BYU does, UVU does. At BYU, your first citation is $60. Once you hit your 7th, that's $200. And so it would get employees who are intentionally parking on the street too long in the downtown area to change their behavior.
If I could just, the more aggressive and the more consistent we get at parking enforcement, I think those are absolutely good things. The more I like the idea of the first offense being a warning. Basically, you said at BYU it's 60. If it was here, it was $0 for the first time. And I don't know, I think we would want to look at, now that we've got some more numbers, what that would do. But yeah, if it's someone that just doesn't understand the rules, sometimes those signs can be difficult. And so if someone makes an honest mistake, it's nice to give them a warning. But once they have that warning, if they do it again within the 12-month or whatever period, then I don't think they have any way, a legitimate complaint if they then get a parking ticket.
And that is exactly what the management plan says. It says that, and it says what would benefit downtown is first citation is a warning with no fine, and multiple citations or late payments become more costly.
Sandy was just mentioning, they do that quite often right now, so.
We, especially in downtown, or if there's a tourist event, or people that are coming in that are maybe not aware, if they get a citation, either the officers have the discretion at that point to give a warning. If not, then we can change the warning after the fact, and that is done, especially through the summer with all of the events that are happening.
Wonderful. I'm encouraged to hear that.
Yes.
I'm a little curious. The hardest part for my kids when they were at BYU to graduate from BYU was not the classes, it was paying off their parking fines before graduation. But do we have a lot of people that have a lot of tickets that are outstanding? How are we on collecting those, or is there some?
I'll show you some stats, I think, here.
Okay.
Everybody's done here. Without getting too far into those stats, total, I think, of those that get reviewed, I think Sandy reviews about 300 of them a month that she makes those decisions on whether she can give them a warning or reduce the fee or whatever. So I think it's about 1,700 citations we write a month, and about 300 of those or so Sandy reviews individually and does that very thing, and see if it warrants some kind of reduction or a dismissal. So, and we'll get to that real briefly in a second. The other thing is pertaining to growth is we have a proposed budget increase this year where it's to increase an increase of 25% in revenue is needed to balance the needs over the next 5 years in the new proposed budget. Like Karen mentioned, we have a full-time position we want to add. There's some equipment in there, there's a vehicle, there's a couple LPRs, all of those things that we've decided to try to lessen the blow and distribute those costs out over the next 5 years, so we don't have to get that hit all up.
Will you explain what the LPRs are?
That's a license plate reader. So those are the little machines on top of the Jeeps we have now that as they drive down the street, it reads those license plates and gives them a little bit of a timestamp. So when they come back around, it can kind of flag it as though it's been longer than the time allotted, and then they know to cite the vehicle.
And we only have one.
And all permits are only read with the license plate reader, because we changed that ordinance so it's license plate based, and so that one LPR is basically running 24/7 right now.
On a much older vehicle that's
Yes.
often in for maintenance. So we have some proposed budgets, so we can update our tools.
And in the packet that you guys, I think all got before this meeting, there's a 5-year projection of those costs and how I distributed those over the next 5 years to come up with the 25% that we're going to need to balance out the needs of the next 5 years. Some quick stats. I didn't get a whole lot of stats in here, but just to give you an idea of the overall operation that we've got so far. Like I said, about 1,740 citations we do a month. That was about the average over the last 12 months. That's on average just under $40,000 a month in revenue that's generated. And that's about $476,000 a year. And that's been the average for the last 2 years. And the reason well, and our current operating costs are about $463,000. So I put revenue neutral there just to kind of highlight the fact that we're kind of staying balanced with what we're bringing in, but that does not allow for any future needs or expansion. So I threw this graph up here just so you can see that it is kind of a roller coaster of the enforcement effort throughout the year. You can see in some of these times a year when we have students come in or when students are leaving, you can see those peaks. That's around spring and fall, but on the average, those are the stats for what's going on there.
September looks like the hot month for students, I assume, right?
Yeah.
That's students not knowing the
They're all
rules.
moving in and they don't know where to go, so.
I'm curious, I mean, if you're not giving, if you're not finding them often, I don't know what the ratio is when you decide to fine them the first time or for a first offense or not, but it seems like if you're not finding them that first month of September, for example, for students, we lose a lot of revenue. But is that something that they can.
Usually the determination is for people out of town. A lot of the students will just pay, or the photo is so conclusive that the driver should have known that they're parked illegally. We do charge them. I don't change them to a warning. That's more for, like I say, overtime, the Pkwy Center, things like that is when it's more of a natural thing to change it to a warning.
So, some goals that we have in trying to recreate the fee structure. To revise the current rate structure to follow the new law by limiting the old late fee assessment. The new fee structure will provide an incentive to pay on time by receiving a substantial discount rather than adding a hefty late penalty. Here's how we can't double and triple. We need to find a mechanism to generate that revenue on top of the fact, trying to find some incentive to pay. And the fees will increase enough to net approximately a 25% increase in revenue to meet the current needs of the parking enforcement effort as well as those over the next few years. So, this is a touchy thing. We've met quite a few times over the last few months, and we've come up with about 10 scenarios on how to best do that rate increase. And playing with the doubling or tripling the original fee, giving them a huge discount, or trying to keep it minimal with a smaller discount. Of all of those scenarios, we've come up with this scenario number 1 here. And in that packet that I gave you, I think it might even be scenario number 9 or 10, but the fee increase for a typical fee, let me back up a little bit so you can understand how we got to this calculation here. Just general information for how we came up with these calculations. The majority of our citations are $30 citations. About 60% of all of our citations that we write are $30. 30% are $25 and 10% are other. 30% of all those past due violations will pay and have been paying double the fee. 5% of that 30% have been paying triple the fee. So the other goal here was we wanted to stay consistent with what other cities are charging, and like also mentioned, BYU is at $60. So we tried to make that as a benchmark and try not to go over that and maybe stay average or even a little bit less. So that's how we came to scenario number 1. So our typical fee of $30 would raise to $55 with a 30% discount or a $17 discount to pay on time. And then after the 15th day, they would end up with the 25% late fee that's allowed by the new law. So that scenario there would give us our 25% increase in revenue. As we looked at that scenario, we thought by the time we give a $17 discount, that makes the citation $38. If we round it to an even $15 instead of $17, a change of $2 in the discount. That proposed scenario number 2 keeps the fee at $55, same as number 1. Just changing the discount to a $15 discount, and that's a 30% increase in revenue. So what I've done is I took like the top dozen citations just out of the code that we typically would write citations for, and just showed you what the current fee is and what the new fee would be after they paid, provided they paid on time. So this first one is that $15 discount, which is that's the 30% increase in revenue. So you can see the top one is the old fee, and then the new fee. So if they paid on time, they're really going from a $25 fee. Which one is it? That one? Okay. So the new fee would really, in essence, be $40 if they paid on time, like we would hope that they would. And you can see the majority of all those fees, whether they're 25 or even 30, we just make them all same at $55 with the same discount. After 11 days, excuse me, they would no longer qualify for that discount. They would pay the original citation amount, which would be the $55. And I guess the point here is, if you'll notice, our current fee is $50, that's double the fee. It's really only $5 more than what they would have paid initially had they paid late. And then after 15 days, that fee would be $75 because it's triple that fee. Under the new fee structure, it'd actually be a little bit less because the idea there was to generate that revenue with the incentive up front and at the back end. So this one over here is with a $17 discount, which nets the 25% increase instead of the 30. And that just shows you that rather than ending up with a $40 citation, they would end up with a $38 citation. So at the end of the day, we're trying to eliminate that sticker shock by giving them a $60 citation or $55 citation, which seems to be the direction that most are going anyways, and trying to give them some incentive to pay and put up $40 or $38 citation amount. So.
Laramie. I just wanted to interject and say, I think based on the state statute, we're probably, I'm not opposed to the structure, but I think what we probably ought to be careful, I think, to say what's really happening is that 11 days is on time and 5 days is early, right? So they're not getting a discount for paying on time, they're getting a discount for paying early.
Okay.
And then the middle column is actually the deadline, and then the third column is the late fee.
So that's kind of how we've proposed that we restructure the new fee structure. I think the last one was just a question. I guess what we're looking for now is pretty much to give you a heads up on what we're faced with. The new House bill to get us back into compliance, and the increase in revenue to sustain our operation for the next five years or so. So I was kind of looking for maybe some guidance or some input before we finalize the amendment to bring it to council to. Sure.
So the $17 discount for paying early would meet your goals at 25% of revenue, or?
It would.
Okay.
And in that packet I gave you guys, I think it was on the second page, it kind of shows you that in that 5-year CIP kind of balances out at the 5-year level. I think there was a difference of like $13,000 or something, I don't remember, but it keeps us at revenue neutral for the next 5 years.
Other than that, I just echo what Brian said, that it's early on time or late, because
Sure.
I can just imagine the state legislature coming back next year and going, now we're going to regulate how much you can charge.
And in questioning some other cities, because they're all faced with the same issue,
Yeah.
that they wasn't able to provide a whole lot of feedback because they're saying, I don't know, what are you doing? So, so there you go. It's just to give you a heads up on what is coming up with the new amendment and then what's in the budget.
This might be a question for Brian, but I am actually quite grateful that we made this a revenue neutral type situation. We want to enforce, but I'm glad that we don't go out. You hear too many people say, oh, you just meet your quota so you can get your money. Is there, is it, if it's a fee or is it a fine? It's a fine, so if we wanted to, we could go out and earn money because of the fine on this, because
Right.
it's not a fee.
Right. It's, we're allowed to impose civil fines for civil violations of the law. So it's just, you can analogize it to most violations of the law are handled criminally and they are subject to criminal fines, but you can also enforce laws civilly through civil fines. So we're not bound by the same structure as a fee where cost recovery is the only thing that you can do.
So maybe, and the other questions that I maybe didn't see it, but do we have a lot of tickets that are outstanding that we're not able to collect on? Was that,
I didn't have any.
We do. We've just brought Shantae into our organization. And we are trying to catch up. We have a goal for the end of the year to kind of be caught up on our collection. The problem that we face is a parking citation is given to a vehicle, not to a person. So if someone chooses not to pay, it becomes a process to find out the registered owner of that vehicle and send them that notice. And us being a college university town, a lot of the registered owners don't even live around here. They live in other states.
So we are working on it. We are making great progress. But I think when we looked at it, what we had about overall, maybe $1 million. And those were a lot of the tickets that were written before we started bringing stats. So yes, there's.
Potentially $1 million that we are not able to collect. We could share that with BYU on graduation.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether they'd even consider working with, they probably can't even do that, but there's always those, I wonder if there, and I don't know it'd be illegal to go in and say, well, we're gonna turn off utilities or something, you can't do that, but $1 million is.
Collection notices are going out heavily right now, weekly, for these now. It's basically playing catch-up to see what we can get. Sandy was instrumental in implementing a new module into our enforcement software that allows us to search other states for these individuals. There are some states that are excluded from this, such as California is one and a couple others, that we cannot locate these license plates, and so those will basically be a total write-off. And so, you know, it gets a little challenging because you're just collecting the license plate information. You're not getting actual addressing and things like that. So.
One other collection that we do, by ordinance, after 4 citations are gone into default, we can tow the vehicle as a hold for owner until they pay their parking tickets. And we do that occasionally as well.
So I think it's prudent the way that you're doing these projections. That looks good to me. I'm hopeful that by adding a full-time employee, that we can even more robustly enforce on our parking regulations. I'm also hopeful, though, that with the new price structure and whatnot, and with more consistent and uniform enforcement, I'm hoping that maybe that comes down because more people are abiding by the parking regulations. So it'll be interesting to see how these numbers play out as we go forward. But I thought it was a good presentation.
Is there any preference one way or the other on sticking with the 25% or net 30, depending on the discount, 15 to 17?
15's an easy number for me to subtract from 55.
That's why we threw that scenario in there. It does net a 30% increase in revenue. Go ahead.
Okay, let me my thoughts on this. I'm torn. I think I'm leaning a little more to the $15 discount, just because I think we've got a lot going on with parking, and I think a lot of that relies on enforcement. I think we need another license plate reader or whatever, and so. You know, I'm definitely, I don't want to be funding other services or whatever, but I think we still have room to improve on our parking enforcement. And I think it's reasonable to fund that from our parking enforcement. So I think I would lean towards the 15.
I like the plan. My feeling's very similar about the 2 options. If the 15 would help us fund another license plate reader, I think that would be good. And I just had a side note. I just read today that a federal court ruled that chalking tires to enforce parking is unconstitutional. So unless that changes, we may have to change our procedures.
I sent that to Mr. Schreiner this morning, and he is having someone look into it with a license plate. Having read it as quickly as I did, the license plate reader would get us around that. It's the physical chalking. And right now, with only 1 license plate reader, honestly, we do both. And so Mr. Schreiner was going to look into that and get back to me in the next couple of days.
And keep in mind, in the supplemental, I did add 2 license plate readers and a vehicle, so we can move on that.
It does create problems, right, for the abandoned vehicle measurement? I mean, don't they have to chalk to be able to see if they've moved it? Because you get those people who park and then they move it 10 feet and move it back.
No, it's easier with the chalk, yes, but right now we can actually take a photo of the tire stem. And then we can determine, because odds of that tire stem being in the exact same spot, in the exact same place on that road are very slim. So we can get around that as well.
Although they'll claim that that happened.
Thank you very much. We went over a little bit, but great discussion. Thank you for your work on this. Thrilled to be having these data-driven discussions. It's very, very good. Item 2 is a discussion about the review of the urban GIG program. I believe the discussion will be led by Ms. Camille Williams, Assistant City Attorney. We also have, I believe, Mr. Brian Cook of Humphrey Archery in attendance, and Jason Swenson, Animal Control Supervisor. Take it away when we have 30 minutes budgeted for this item.
Thank you. I might just tell you, you've got the executive summary and the full evaluation in your hands already, I believe. And I was very impressed with the way Hannah and Rebecca have worked to gather this material together, to format it in an understandable way. And I know that Bryce helped, and that Stan and Phil, Stan Oshinsky and Phil Yule, have done some mapping, and Stan is here and will, when we get to the map, then Stan will help us work with that. Keep in mind that the evaluation includes Hannah and Rebecca and Rachel's research, in addition to information from Officer Swenson, from Wes Alexander of the Division of Wildlife Resources, from Brian Cook from Humphreys Archery, and others that they've consulted. Whoops, went too far. So you'll recall that the initial certificate of registration was for a 3-year period, 2016 to 2019, and the goals were to increase public safety by decreasing the number of deer killed in traffic, since what you have involved is a vehicle, you have potential risk to a driver, you have property damage, you have concerns about people swerving to try to miss the deer and then perhaps either running off the road or running into the other lane of traffic. We wanted also to decrease the damage to property. Now, the estimate of damage to vehicles was based on a national insurance estimate of $3,000 for a collision with a deer. And obviously you could have lesser or greater amounts. The estimate of damage to residents, plants, trees, gardens, and the preventative measures that they used, for example, sprays, fences, taller fences, dogs, things like that, was self-reported by residents, and this was it when I was contacting residents in late 2015 and early 2016. And implicitly, what we were also trying to do is prevent an unmanageable increase in the number of resident deer. The goal was never to remove all the resident deer from the city. That's not a goal that I think anyone has or could accomplish. But what we want to do is keep it manageable. And what we were hearing from the numbers of deer killed in traffic and from residents who had these concerns they were bringing forward is that the number of deer at that time was unmanageable. So Rachel made this monthly chart. 2016 is in the blue, the orange is 2017, the gray is 2018, to show the number of accidents by month. That seemed to be the major thrust of the council's concern in the last study session that I attended, in which we discussed the urban deer control plan, was what's happening with the public safety issue. And Stan is here, and he has another map that we could look at that would help us understand where those collisions are occurring. Obviously, they're primarily on North University Avenue and then down on South State Street, where you've got relatively high speeds, about 50-mile-per-hour speeds. Councilman Winterton.
Yes, I see, that's really interesting. The 18 has gone down almost every time. What are we attributing to that? Is it the weather? This year was kind of it was a rather harsh one. Maybe we didn't get as much snow, but it was a wet one, and I wonder why we are down so much. Is there any reason for
Hannah
that?
may want to address that.
So 2018 had the fewest or second fewest number of accidents of all of the years in about half of the months. We saw them being a little bit higher than, or all of the months, yeah. We saw them being a little bit higher than 2016, 2017 just during the summer. And that might have been a seasonal increase. Mountain deer are also frequently involved in these accidents, but we're not targeted by the program. So there are some external factors that do influence the number of accidents, but on the whole, 2018 was the most stable year. So we didn't see as many spikes as we did in previous years.
And is there a reason that we know why that was that way?
We would have to analyze a lot more of those external factors like urban spread, increased speeds on roads, increased number of cars on roads, number of mountain deer in the area, deer that might have been driven by weather, or rainfall or snowfall patterns and precipitation. Also, that urban area increasingly encroaching further into the mountains where mountain deer have been that have not been targeted by the program. So, in short, there are a lot of different things that could be impacting those numbers. We need more analysis to answer exactly.
So over time, we would like to think that our program is partly responsible for seeing a decrease.
It certainly has decreased the number of urban deer in the area. We've seen that herd decrease in number from about 500 to about 300, are some of the estimates, give or take. So it certainly hasn't increased the number of accidents, we can say that much. The numbers alone can't tell us whether or not it contributed a significant decrease in the number of accidents. But it's just the data.
Did you say in the report, though, that they can tell by the body size of the deer, whether it's a mountain deer or...
Yes,
So
those were
can't
not
they know?
reported in the reports that we
I
have.
see. So we
whether
can't
it was true
know
or was.
based on the accidents whether it was a mountain deer or an urban deer?
And mountain deer can come down from the mountains and decide to stay in the city. As the generations become urbanized, they tend to become a little bit smaller.
Officer Swenson might be able to speak from his experience in terms of going out on the deer killed in traffic calls about whether he sees a size differential that would suggest whether the deer hit in traffic was either urban or visitor from the mountains.
Like I said, like you were saying, most of our deer accidents involved are in the mouth of the canyon or on South State in the fast areas, where the speed limit's a little higher. Also, like Hannah was saying, due to the weather, the snow comes in, the deer come down. And if we have a bad snowstorm, we're gonna have a lot of deer that are not gonna want to go back up to the mountains because they see how easy it is to stay down here and eat all the food down here.
Yeah, I think Hannah is using an appropriate amount of caution in saying that there are so many variables that we can't control that maybe it would be overly optimistic to say that the urban deer control plan is the thing that actually brought the numbers down. I personally would agree that it is a contributing factor. Yes.
So in looking at the map you have right here, between the three different colors, 3 different years, it would appear that on South State and North University, there are fewer accidents in 2018 on those main roads than previous years.
We can isolate out by year or find an area and find a more specific number because some of those dots do overlap.
Right,
So
right.
if you'd like to see a specific area, let me know.
So I'm just wondering if our main roads are any safer, if the location, the average location of where these accidents are happening is shifted, and right now it just seems like the blue dots are a little bit closer to the mountainside and less of them on the main road, but that's just my first visual take on it.
So here are all the accidents in 2018.
Those are the accidents in 2018.
Here's the accidents in 2017. Sorry. So it does seem...
Well,
it's not...
Well, it's not scrolled out.
Can you scroll out? Yeah.
Yeah, I was focusing on that northern area. We'll get the whole city. So here's 2016, here's 2017, here's 2018.
So I wasn't sure if there was any pattern difference, but that's just one thing to keep in mind.
Similar patterns, but an overall fewer number. I don't know if that's going to continue or if we'll see another spike in 2019, again impacted by mountain deer weather patterns.
Stan can put a box around a specific intersection and would be able to show you the accidents per year at a specific intersection if you wanted to. Maybe, which one are you going to give us first? Whichever one of you.
I'm the one driving. Yeah. If we pick this area right up along here. On these main roads. There were 135 accidents just in that section over the years. There were 16 in 2018. Oops, I lost my arrow. Is there something else to do that?
What is it?
I will just reapply. 61 in 2014. And 57. So it does seem like there were fewer in this area in 2014.
And I mean,
2018.
my concern is that those roads with the higher speeds probably have a bigger impact when you do hit something.
Oh, definitely. I found it stunning that there were 527 accidents in that 3-year period. That seems to me to be as though we've been more lucky than anything else, that we haven't had some fatalities, some human fatalities.
Yeah, I think maybe the concern that, I mean, I thought Anna's report was very careful about not jumping to conclusions, and if we're not able to jump to conclusions, I feel like we're still kind of flying blind, because we don't know how much of this is urban, how much of this is mountain. We don't know whether or not those harvested deer in the urban area have been worth the cost, because we don't know what exactly they're saving. And short of car accidents, we also don't have a lot of data on, except anecdotal, on damage to property. I mean, we sort of know what deer do in terms of eating flowers in gardens and so on, but so I'm suddenly feeling like, well, without hard data to help us know what's happening with the car accidents, I don't know what problem we're trying to solve. I don't know if anyone else feels the same on the council, but that I'm sort of other than, and I guess I'm also uncertain as to like how do you sustain this into the future? So if we have a population of 500, we're trying to get down to 200, maybe 100, and that's manageable. But I don't know where's the threshold between manageable and unmanageable, and how long do we have to keep killing deer, and then suddenly we don't have to anymore? Or is this something that you just have to continually do in order to manage?
It would be a maintenance program.
Yeah. So I mean, it doesn't feel like it has an end. That's the other problem. I mean, I don't know that doing nothing is any better either. I just don't know. Do we know what the population of urban deer has been over, say, 5 to 10 years? Do we have any data on that?
I don't know that we've got data. Brian Cook has the best data. He just came in terms of our resident deer. I don't know whether you want to address that, Brian.
Well, when we first started looking at it, we ran about 35 cameras throughout your city in just general areas that people had concern or assumed that they had deer problems. And then, with that, we ran them for a few months, and it was during the early spring and early summer time. So, a lot of people will get the assumption that we got to. How do we decide between an urban deer and a mountain deer? And there's a threshold there that's kind of a gray area. We can't, at a certain point, you can tell a mountain deer from a city deer, but there are some deer that are hopping back and forth, okay? So there is this potential animal that wanders back and forth, but a deer that remains in the city from, when we start counting and looking at deer, it's early spring, and if that deer is staying in the city and we're consistently seeing between early June and late August, you obviously have a resident deer. That's not a deer that's going back up into the mountains. And so when we first calculated this, we came in, and that's hard to say because some people, Johnson's up here will say they have 25 deer, and then we go down to Smith's 2 miles away and they say they have 25 deer. And sometimes you have a crossover between the same deer, and it's confusing for residents because they think, well, we got 25 and so do they, so that's 50, right? And that's not always the case. These deer have a tendency to move throughout the city, and so when we start running cameras 10 miles away from each other, and you have unique deer such as a 2-point on one side and a spike on the other, that deer running with 9 does is pretty identifiable when you see him 10 miles south on camera with the same group of does, right? So it's pretty easy to identify, quote unquote, an urban deer when we have a long term of being able to monitor them. So when we first started looking at this and going off what residents were telling us, we had to take into calculation, okay, residents are seeing the same deer, but at the same time, even if I count every deer that I can physically see, I'm seeing probably a third to half of what you potentially have, right? So when we look at a number, the division would always encourage us to try to look bigger than smaller because we pigeonhole ourselves into a corner if we say we have 200 deer, then they want to remove a percentage. There's no way we're taking every deer out of your city, right? It's impossible. But if you can monitor the deer to where it's a tolerable level for your people and your safety collisions to say, okay, we can hit this number, and if we can, I'm good with it. It's the Friedmans that say, okay, I'm okay with seeing 3 or 4 deer, but I want to see 25. So it's getting that number to where it's tolerable, but when we first started looking, we estimated between 400 to 500 deer moving throughout your city. And I can tell you today, it's not that high anymore. Guaranteed, it's not that high. Because when we first started running cameras, we were seeing anywhere from 24 to 35 animals activity-wise. That doesn't mean don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean it's 35 animals, okay? But when a camera's in a location and it's getting 35 hits a night, by animals moving back and forth, that tells you there's a pretty good movement of animals, right? But when we can put those same animals or those same cameras in those same locations today and only get 1 or 2 hits a night, we've obviously cut down the infrastructure of the animals in that particular area, okay? So I'm very confident in saying your deer herd's between 200 and 300 animals today versus 500 or closer to that number 3 years ago. And part of that is that you already are running a lethal program on top of the lethal program you have, and that's the numbers you're looking at right there, right? Unfortunately, a lethal car removal doesn't keep up with the birth rate. And that's what we're seeing, is that as these animals have come into cities over the last, and this isn't just Provo, this is every city across the Wasatch Front. As deer have moved into the cities, your deer population is doubling every year. The demographics of people is what's limiting how fast that herd grows based on car collisions. So you take a city like Highland that when we started off, they were at 87 collisions. 3 years later, they were at 6.
I think what was confusing in the report though is that the distinction between mountain and urban deer. So if we don't know that the accidents are actually correlated with the population in the city, we may never be able to control those accidents, and they also may not actually have a relationship correlated to the population numbers in the city.
Correct.
Because we could have, and this is also because we're dealing with statewide policies about deer management, right?
Correct. And part of that is that, what you guys have a corridor that comes out of the mouth of the canyon, right? That's potentially part of your city. And when you look at that, you can just go back and start looking at dates before the program ever started. And you're going to see that the fluctuation just does this, right? SR 92 coming out of American Fork Canyon is the same way. We didn't touch that area as far as mountain deer in Highland, but that fluctuated anywhere from 22 to 65 animals a year based on weather and how far the animals get pushed down. The other thing that SR 92 does in Highland, because as soon as that Cedar Hills area started going into development, the number of traffic going up the mouth of the canyon and coming along that bench quadrupled. And so that number continued to climb, and then, number of residents go up with it. So those are all factors that are super hard to like really put on it. Now, when we go into an area and say we're removing a mountain deer or a city deer, I can tell you 100% when we remove a city deer, you can tell the difference in an animal. They're absolutely visually different. A mountain deer yields 150 to 200 pounds of venison when you harvest that animal. Your city deers are 75 pounds. They look the same this way when you look at them broadside, but look at one when it stands, it looks like the front on, it's this wide. A mountain deer is 18 inches wide. They're substantially different. So but then again, cameras tell us whether it's a mountain deer or it's a city deer. And I can tell you this year, January 15th, you had a huge influctuation of mountain deer that came into your valley. So the cameras are still running.
Is it safe to say that most of the accidents there at the top of University, because of its location right next to some undeveloped areas, and that all along the foothills and then down by South State Street, that those are all mountain deer accidents?
I'm not going to say they're all mountain deer, because I tried to work with a lady that there's a chunk of ground on the east side of that, or the west side of that corridor right there with an elderly lady owned that. She didn't live here, she lived up in Cedars, or up in Price somewhere, but she had a group of about 35 head that were living right there on her property on the west side of the corridor. Now, you take 35 females and look at their birth rate. The statistics on birth rate, it's a given statistic, it's been studied for years and years. The average doe will yield 2 to 3 fawns a year. So when you take 9 does and realize that if those are does that are over a year old, they're eligible to be mothers. So at 1 year they won't, their second year in they are. So if you take 9 does that are over 2 years old, you just quadruple that number of deer. So if you think about that number that's moving back and forth, the fawns are typically a lot of the times the ones that get hit in the first year to 2 years of their lives. But the adults that survive that 3 year get a little bit smarter. Doesn't mean that they don't. I mean, the bucks are the dumb ones because they come by during the breed season and the doe went across the road, well, I'm going with it. They don't even think about looking. But so I would be safe to say that you find far more adolescent animals on the side of the road than you're seeing adult deer. And that is just because of the education and the lack thereof of the education of them and where they're being raised. But you're not scratching the surface of what your reproduction is.
I think it is safe to say that we haven't done the kind of study that DWR would do. We did the kind of study that we could do with the resources we had. We did it at the start of the program, and we did it at this evaluation point. The council could certainly commission such a study if they choose. The success of the program is really dependent upon the residents and the trust of the residents in cooperating with the deer specialists, with the DWR. The harvesting and trapping are done on private land. In some cities, there's been take on city property. We don't have that. We're more densely populated, have fewer open areas than some cities such as Mapleton and Highland. So what happened was over 400 man-hours that first year were expended in contacting residents, finding those residents who would cooperate, and then the neighbors surrounding that resident for 60 yards or so?
100 yards.
100 yards to make sure those residents would not object to the lethal, so that we don't have distress and trauma to neighbors.
So I had another question about that. There was that one account of a deer that, I know that when they're shot with the arrow, they can still wander. And there was an account of a deer that ended up in someone's backyard.
In the comments?
Distressed. It was still alive. I mean, that could be a pretty significant traumatic event for the animal and for the family who has this
It
episode
definitely
taking
can.
place in their backyard. And so that convinced me, I don't like the idea of, I only like the idea of trapping and euthanizing right there, because if you can't guarantee that that's not going to keep happening, I know it maybe doesn't happen all the time, but that seems like a very
Could we have
unfortunate.
Brian respond to that?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say that this is something that's a concern in every city, and I'm 100% confident that that animal wasn't one of ours, and the reason why, and Jason can contest to this, we use a crossbow and a crossbow bolt. A crossbow bolt that we use and the way we set them up, their kinetic energy is so high it'll hit both shoulder blades and pass completely through the animal. The animal that was witnessed or the animal that somebody has seen is an animal that's come off of your hunting area, your mountain area. You have a boundary there, and this is all legal to hunt. And so you've got an animal that's been wounded, and when wounded, heads downhill. And if there's a visual arrow in any animal, it's not ours. It's virtually impossible for one of our arrows to stick. So, and I will say this, and I just want to say this, we have 100% batting average at this point, and I don't want to jinx ourselves by any means, but that is one thing that I take into such high consideration, is the visually and being super conscious of making sure that someone who doesn't want to witness this won't witness this. And that's why there's such an extreme measure to meet with every resident that potentially wants a lethal place, to make sure I'm extending myself beyond them, to make sure those residents or neighbors understand the potential of exactly what you just said. And if there's one person that absolutely says, I can't handle that, I don't want to see that, I don't want my grandkids to see it, I don't want whatever, right? Then that, it's not a chance, it's not a choice, it's not even an option. And that's where what you just said about the trapping and euthanizing, that's a huge advantage that would bring to this program. So, but that safety of what you just said, safety is first and foremost in and it's not just safety for what we do with an archer, it's safety for what the public has to witness. So,
just as a footnote, his bolts have markings specific to the archer. They also have a phone number on it, so that anyone finding a bolt could call and report it. And your bolts have been recovered, is that correct?
Correct.
And so we don't have any.
The deer that had the arrow in it, I actually put down, and it was not one from our archers, it was a regular arrow from a bow.
I know we're running late.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is we've got like another minute or so is all that we have. So
okay.
I don't know, I mean, if we feel like we could wrap this up in 5 minutes, we could go, or I'm wondering if there's enough that we should reschedule.
What I have is basically just walking you through this. Maybe we can just jump to what some of the choices are, because you essentially have this there. You could do the non-renewal. The number of deer will increase. The number killed in traffic, I think, are likely to increase. Road safety, I think, is likely to decrease. Damage to residents' property is likely to increase. And you have a lost opportunity risk, simply because you'll have to find someone again to take this contract. I think animal control costs may go up. We'll be using our policemen to do more work with more deer killed in traffic. You may save some money for the city budget, and it may be that what the city wants to do is explore alternative mitigation strategies. And some of those are quite expensive. If you do want to renew the Corps, 2 public hearings are necessary. The application is due around June. Humphreys has changed its pricing so that if there's a desire to lower the cost, you can do that by choosing a number of locations. So it's a site pricing, so that the cost could be closer to $127 to $244 per deer. And with the option of trap and euthanize, that's something we haven't done. There are some startup costs. It can be, our understanding right now is it can be done at night, which would alleviate some of the concerns about viewing a distressful situation, and probably increase the opportunities to remove some deer, particularly in small areas where you may not want to shoot a projectile. So those are some of the options, and we've already addressed some questions. Thank you for your time. If you want more information another time, we'll be happy to talk.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you wrapping up like that. We'll take 2 minutes for discussion. We will likely need to bring this back for more thorough discussion, but Mr. Connect.
So I'm in favor of keeping the program and adding the trap and euthanize option, which I think will help, especially in those areas where there's no other way to get them out and you really want to trap them where they live and then eliminate them.
Okay.
And I'm in favor of the project also. Mayor, is this in the police budget from what I understand?
There is a supplemental.
Is it a supplemental request?
It's
not in the
currently,
budget at this time.
we appropriated money earlier this year to finish this year's, but if we were to continue into the next fiscal year, it would be something we would need to add to the fiscal 20 budget.
I'd just like to echo what Mr. Connect said. I feel like we made an investment in operations and educations, and if we keep going and add the trap and euthanize, we're only going to get more efficient.
Thank you. I think I'll add mine, and that gets us to at least 4. I also think we should continue, at least in the, I think that it's shown enough that it makes sense to continue. I really like the trap and euthanize, because if I understood from past discussions, if we're really focused on the urban deer, and that I have some concerns about that or whatever, but if we're focused on the urban deer, it seems like the trapping is where we can actually really focus on the urban and get kind of at that, as well as I don't know, as we were talking with the state and whatnot, but why, we don't have time to discuss this now, but why can't we be doing this in the summertime when theoretically we don't have any mountain deer, and every deer that's in the city during the summertime could be classified as urban bear, so why can't we be trapping and euthanizing during the...
From what I understand, it's, you don't want to do a pregnant deer, it spawns.
It's a 2-for-1, which would be makes perfect sense, right? But it's the ethical questions. OC or something like that is what they call it. But yes, that's that whole thing.
Okay.
Plus, the meat can't be wasted, and so you want to do it at a time when as I understand, when the temperature is low enough that the meat can be handled properly.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can I go back to budget one more time that you just follow up on that? So you say the end of the year. With that being said, where does our budget hit? Because I don't think, we're almost to the point that we can't do this anymore, or we already are, I
To
think.
the end of the calendar or fiscal year?
Fiscal year. So if we want to continue the program through the next fiscal year or on an ongoing basis perpetually, I think the sensible step would be to, 1, do the public hearings, and 2, perhaps pass a motion supporting the mayor to consider a supplemental request funding the urban deer program.
So basically, you say we've got funding to the end of the year, but it's basically spent already, because...
I mean, we're basically out of the season.
We're out of the season, so
Anyway.
that's what I was wondering, okay.
Your permission slip ends August 1st of this year with the division. So there's no moving even into the next season, even though it's this year.
The one other thing, so we might even do that motion now.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could do both.
The one thing that I'd be interested in, I definitely am very interested in doing the traps and euthanize, and that has the startup costs. I'm also very intrigued with the new pricing structure. Are we to the point where we drop down to 2 sites? And so we can probably even shrink the overall cost even while adding the trap and euthanize by reducing the number of sites for the, anyway, so that's kind of what I'm weighing. I do support continuing with this project, but I think we need to be as thoughtful as we can with the data that we have now about what makes the most sense going forward. And I appreciated that we also have the ability to kind of year by year renegotiate some of those details.
So just a quick comment, if you decide to make a motion to have me look at it for supplementals, I would appreciate also if you talked, let the council chair know you sent me an email with your priorities for supplementals, and this wasn't on it. So if you want this added on to your priorities of supplementals, it's tough. So I just need to know where the council lies. You sent me your priorities, and I've considered those, and I will consider them again as I go into next Monday to decide the supplementals, but this was not on it.
Thank you. How much is it per year? What are we looking at per year then?
I think it depends on the pricing structure, but traditionally we've spent a little over $10,000 on the lethal portion of it. Now, if we were to do the trap and euthanize, I don't know that we necessarily know
So
how
there's
much that would
a
cost.
breakdown in the presentation. The contract was $10,000 per year plus the fee for the camera rentals and plus bait for the entire program. The new per site structure is $2,500 per, or plus the bait and camera rentals for each site. So if the city wanted to operate 2, if they wanted to operate 4, and they could decide to do that and have a little bit more control over how much of the budget they are contributing to it. Brian said he recommends between 2 and 4 locations.
Yeah, and just so you know, if there's a trap and relocate, or I mean, if there's a trap, not trap and relocate, we're gonna do a trap and euthanize. If there's a location already assumed at 2,500, then the trap and the trap and euthanize will just go with that without an extended cost. Just because my guys are already taking care of that site. But if we say we decide to do another location, then we've got to come up with some just fair number to manage that site and be able to travel back and forth. Where the harvest site, we're already there and we're doing our job, so it makes perfect sense to have a trap set while my guys are going back and forth, because they're already making that effort, so that would just come with that site. So if we do additional sites, and maybe we get to the point where we're like, hey, let's have 2 lethal sites and let's have 5, non-lethal site, or I mean a lethal site, but a trap and euthanize, that would make more sense to just have like a monthly $25 something where we're looking at just the time spent on behalf of going and baiting and setting and then removing the animals, so.
And the city already owns 5 traps and 1 trailer that were purchased to assist with the non-lethal portion, so we didn't have to use the states, but funding was discontinued and those were never used. They are still available. So it would require cables and stakes and a one-time setup fee.
Yeah, so we would charge the one-time setup fee to cover the expense of the guys that are going and setting them up and staking them, tying them down, and whatever. So.
All of that is in the report.
Can't we have just a motion that would authorize the expenditure of the funds based on a model that we're given? I mean, I've heard so many different things today. It'd be nice to have a model. This is what we're going to vote on, and this is what it's going to cost, and we're going to appropriate the money to do it.
You could appropriate the funds similar to how we've done it in the past. I think it's up to you on to decide if this is a perpetual program. It's probably something we should build into the budget on a regular basis and that base. But if
that could be part of the motion,
it could be. It just depends on if you do that before the end of the fiscal year, then we'll need to know so that we can plan to include it in the 2020.
Okay,
and
so
if
we
we
just
do it in
get to
2020,
whatever we need to do the program, please do that and let us vote on it.
Would you like me to put together numbers for what it would cost for 2, 3, and 4 sites, and then 2, 3, and 4 with the trap and euthanize option? I can put together some numbers.
I think we want a motion that incorporates the best program.
I think
what you're proposing would allow us to know what the best program is.
That way you'll get an idea of
So,
the cost expectation.
what I think you could do is just pass a motion encouraging the mayor to consider that supplemental request and then give her the discretion of how much we would build into the budget, and then after we present to you the tentative budget, we can have discussions on whether or not you would like to see that adjusted. So that gives her the latitude to select what she thinks operationally, using input from the staff on what's the right level.
I think we have to weigh the issue here that this is not, at least until I get more information on this, which I would very much like. What concerns me is I don't see an end to it. So it could be that this is a permanent part of our budget, and maybe that's the only way to handle this problem. But it doesn't seem to make sense to just go year to year saying, yeah, we'll give a little more money, and then we're afraid to stop it because we don't want the population to blow back up, and then we're just stuck. So I think we're either in or out. I mean, I think we've got to determine that.
So I would like to think we're in, and that we're going to take this seriously, But over time, if we do take this seriously and are harvesting in the right places, trapping and euthanizing in the right areas, the numbers will go down and the effort required will probably be less.
It does. Highland City's in that same boat right now. They were 5 stands at one time and they're 1. We moved one location randomly throughout the city all year. They pay the $2,500 and they pay for the cameras and rent and bait. So they're significantly, they're $2,500 to $3,000 a year to maintain their city.
Brian had a comment. Oh, sorry.
Well, I don't know how applicable it is. I'm trying to think through. I mean, I guess just thinking through options, the other alternative that occurs to me, instead of trying to make this decision at the same time you're trying to approve the budget, is because you have to renew your permit with the state and that requires public hearings. It occurs to me that you could make no decisions about the money until after you've done that, and hold the public hearings on getting the permit renewed, and if that happens, then make the decision about the money, which would, now the downside of that is that would require, in the first year, it would require an appropriation after the budget has already been approved.
I mean, I personally really like that idea. Maybe it's, I don't know how responsible a certain aspect of that is, but I think that gives us more time to look into it a little bit more. It gives us time to hear from the public. And I'm hoping this would be a sub $10,000 thing. So I know every dollar matters, but compared to some of the other things we're looking at, I mean, it's a relatively small item. And we're also 15 minutes over on this. So any motions right now, or do we just move ahead based on what we've discussed?
I don't think we're prepared to make a regional motion.
Okay.
I think that motion needs to be prepared for us.
Well, but we can have time to prepare if we just go with what Brian suggested.
So I guess one potential motion would be just to move forward and schedule those public hearings.
Yes.
Okay.
So moved.
Thank you. Anyone want to second that? Excellent. Mr. Sewell's hand first. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? And that is unanimous. All right. Thank you, Mr. Kinnick, for wrapping that up for us. Well. And Mr. Jones for giving that suggestion. All right, we are well behind, but we will move forward on item 3, which is a discussion about amending Ordinance 1901, previously approved on January 22nd with regards to the development agreement required in order for a zone change at 2300 North University Parkway to become effective. We have 30 minutes budgeted for this, and rather than 10,000, we're talking about multiple millions of dollars here. So
30 or 40 minutes potentially.
So hopefully we'll have a good discussion on this one too.
Just the GIS one. GIS one.
We will, this will be presented by Mr. Dixon Holm, the Director of our Economic Development.
GISHome.provo.org. GIS Home. And then you just log in with your city account. .provo.org. Oh, sorry, trying to type that. .org. Oh my goodness. It's
Just click the top one.
yeah, the first link is there. Thank you. It's in this area, a little further.
Yeah, you can make that center focus right there. And if you can bring on the aerial image.
zoom in just a little bit. And then one more request. If you can go here and just snap on the property lines.
Do parcels for imagery.
Just go
Scroll down further. Towards the bottom. Parcels for imagery.
If you'll click on both of those, this one and that one.
You have to check the box. Is this?
Yeah, then if you just close that box. And then zoom out just a little.
There doesn't seem to be
Perfect. No, yeah,
in
it's,
between, sorry.
no, it's
About
okay.
that.
It's okay. Thank you for doing that. It's a little. So council, thank you. So this is on for this evening. This is not sure what we actually entitled this, a discussion about amending a development agreement, specifically, or some of the specifics regarding a proffer, where there was discussion about low and moderate income housing, and also addressing sewer needs concerns there. Had an opportunity to meet with most of you, all of you, at some point. The developers here, and they're anxious to get going. So what was brought before the Planning Commission and the council was to rezone this back portion of the property from SC3, which the whole 28 acres right now is zoned SC3, and to essentially take this part here and make it ITOD to allow for some housing. Under the previous approval in the SC3, there's a provision in the SC3 zone that allows for 20% of the project to be built in housing and acreage. It doesn't give a density provision or requirement. It's really whatever you can build and provide parking and meet all the amenity requirements within the prescribed area. So again, 28 acres, 20%, so about 5.6 acres of that was going to be residential within the SC3, so no zone change required. In fact, it was really just site plan approval. At the time, they also had some office proposed. In fact, there was quite a bit of office. It was about 300,000 square feet of office. As you can see, it's in a state of half demolished. It'd be nice if it was in a state of half built, but it's half demolished. The Cafe Rio was recently constructed. This is the Shopco building, and this portion here has actually been removed now too, just to update. And at some point, the Shopco and potentially maybe the movie theater may come out, or that may be repurposed. So due to some changes in the market, the office portion was removed, or decided not to go forward with that based on what was already on the market and in the area, not just in Provo, but in the valley. Decided to go with more housing. They had originally showed about, I want to say about 280 to 300 housing units plus some hospitality on the project. When the developer decided they wanted to have more residential, again, the project, in order for it to be successful, so to augment some of the housing, to do more housing, and to not do the office portion. However, they were pretty far down the road, and they even had a building with steel that's still sitting in someone's construction yard. That won't happen now. So then it was decided that maybe we would attempt to amend the SC3 zone to allow for 33% housing instead of the 20%. Went to Planning Commission, and they felt that that was diluting the SC3 zone too much, and suggested that maybe an ITOD would be more appropriate. And so it was proposed that the developer would come back, and half the property again would be ITOD, which would allow the residential. Again, still no density provision, just you need to meet the landscaping, parking, setback requirements, and that the rest of the project out front would remain SC3
and have those retail components to it. Because it was a zone change, as zone changes often go, there is typically a development agreement and some type of a proffer. Because the council was discussing and talking about, and still is, about how to deal with low and moderate income housing, it was suggested that the proffer should potentially have some type of a provision for some low and moderate income housing. And that's what went forward to the council. As the developers had an opportunity to take a look at that, we felt that that would provide a challenge to the project and its success, and now have asked that the development agreement be re-looked at, and that the developer would then make a request at their request as it relates to a proffer and a development agreement. And as we have talked with the council individually, there's been a couple of things that have been put forward, and I think Brian has prepared two development agreements, one of which does not have a housing component to it at all for low and moderate income, and the other does. And so that's just kind of the overview. And again, the developers are here, our representatives of the developer are here if you have any questions of them. And that's what would be going forward for this evening. And as we talked with the council, it seems like there was kind of a spectrum of, my biggest concern as being charged with economic development was to keep the project moving and not delay it any further. My concern is, while certainly there has been some changes that the developer has tried to work through, that's probably caused some delay, but there's been other delays on the project. And I'd just like to keep it moving forward so it doesn't stay in a state of half demolished longer than it does, because even the longer it sits that way, the greater the opportunity of some of the others properties which the developer doesn't own, this one, the Olive Garden, and the JCW, don't want those to leave. And I think the longer it sits in its current state, the higher that likelihood is. So, certainly things to still be worked out relative to, again, what the proffer actually looks like, and there are still some sewer issues that ought to be worked out.
What did the acreage change from the SC3 where it was 5.6 to doing the ITOD?
So again, the overall site is 28 acres. It allowed for 5.6. This would be roughly 14 acres, would be ITOD, and the balance would be, the other 14 would be SC3.
I think I heard you say, that there's no density cap on it, but it's what will fit within the design guidelines. But it was...
Right now, they're proposing 500 housing units. So really, it'd be a net increase of about 200, again, because the previous plan was for 280, 300. And the hospitality, while certainly has a residential component, it's essentially a commercial section. It would not be counted as residential, but it would still have to meet parking and setback and adequate services, of course.
Any discussion?
So are we looking at these drafted proposals, Brian? When are we looking at those?
We can do that at any time. I guess the question is, we drafted, or I drafted two sets of proposed language amendments to the already approved development agreement based on discussions that I was part of in the week coming up to this, although that only involved a couple of council members. I don't know, I guess it's still not clear to me which of the two or both are actually being proffered by the developer. So we can look at either of them anytime.
Mr. Schultz?
So, as I understood it, the original proffer was revised and we met with the developers, and I kind of had the feeling like they were kind of giving us two options. This kind
Well, I
of,
think they have a preference, again, they're here, and then if you want to ask them, they probably answer that question for you.
so if that's the case, and I guess we'll ask them to speak to that in just a moment, I was comfortable with their logic and rationale for revising the number that was offered as the in lieu portion of the in lieu fee. That sounded good to me, but I guess we need to determine if that is available to us as an option.
Yeah, I think our initial conversation with
Can you just identify yourself?
Yeah, Cameron Bassett with Central Development, I'm the owner's rep on the project. The original development agreement was issued out to us the day of the hearing. Afterwards, we talked to Dixon quite a bit about the proffer, and it's our understanding that other ITOD projects don't necessarily have a proffer, but that had been included in this. In addition to that, it had been leveraged on the entirety of all the units, not just the increased amount of units that we would be asking for. So our initial preference and conversation was maybe it made sense to eliminate it entirely. Working jointly with Dixon and the team, we've been trying to be collaborative, so we gave a second option if that was what was necessary, which isn't our first option, but our second option would be I think it was $18,500 per unit on the 200 units above the baseline that did not have previously a proffer included. So our preference would be the first, but the second, we could work with council to move this forward.
And you can clarify the first being that there was no housing component.
Correct. Did that answer your question?
Mr. Jones, so where does that leave us as far as?
So, Hannah, can you, let's see, the documents that are attached, can you bring up the development agreement draft, the one that's labeled 3A, version 2?
While that's coming up, I don't know if it, just for completeness, and just make sure, that I think we all kind of have some knowledge of how this all played out, but just make it clear. The zoning was in place, the SC3 was in place, but was modified at the applicant's request. So we made some changes to SC3.
The modifications meaning the 20%?
The 20%?
Yeah, that actually predated them. I'm not sure if that was specific to their request or if the city did that.
Okay.
Kind of the whole set. Yeah, and I apologize, I don't know the answer.
No, that's fine. But the SC3 had what was in place. There was a plan that fit under that. And the developer wanted to make a change in the plan. And came to the idea of rezoning a portion of it to the ITOD. In working with community development, as they often do with developers, trying to get a feel for what the council would be interested in and would be willing to do, and that's where they worked up this idea of proffering a development agreement. I believe the idea of the 10% affordable component had been there for quite some time. What community development suggested would be an appropriate fee in lieu was presented or was decided the day of the planning commission. But that 10% had been discussed previously. What was proffered, what was in the proffer that we saw, which we made the decision based on what was presented to us, and it was a unanimous decision, and maybe the council would have been okay with something else, but what we saw and what we unanimously approved was the 10% on the 500 at a rate of $57.50, I believe. And I think I emailed, I don't know if everyone saw it, but I emailed the numbers around them, and that approaches that's in the high 2 million, 2.9 rounded range. Now there's a discussion, well, can we make a change to that, which is, completely legitimate question to ask, is the council willing to change that? Those numbers are, depending on if we apply it, if we apply it at 10%, if it's applied to the 500 or if it's applied just to the net, around 200, if it's the 57.5 or the 18.5, all of these, have a major impact on if assuming that they're going to move forward with a payment in lieu rather than building the affordable housing, really affects what that final price tag is. I think the question to me is would we have approved, what I guess one question I have is what would I have approved the first go around? If nothing was proffered, would I have approved that? And then the question now is what's appropriate? Is it appropriate to revisit that that agreement? Sorry, I just lost it. Something that would be important to think about is we had a zone that was in there, we had a plan that had been put forward, and we were asking to change that. And so to me the question is what's in the community's best interest? Is it in the community's best interest to change that zoning? There's been a lot of investment in that area, particularly with the BRT line, and we put some investment in there to spur development, to address housing in our city, which for years now has been high on our priorities. We want to address housing affordability, and so as part of that, when I was looking at it, I said, well, we want the development, we want this development to go forward. We also want to address affordable housing, and what was proffered, I felt definitely does that. And so now, when looking to revisit this, again, we still want a really good development there that's going to be an attractive entrance to the city. I feel like we also care about housing affordability, and so that's what I'm weighing, the request for a rezone, as well as, well, I guess not. I guess it's just the request to change the development agreement. And so if something is now being proffered, I need to weigh that. And I guess I also wonder, I mean, is it on, would we consider just reverting back to the old zone? Does that make sense to do?
And if I could jump in and address some of the logistics there. So if you recall, you'll notice on the agenda that this is listed not as a discussion about amending the development agreement, but a discussion about amending the previously approved ordinance. And the reason why is because the ordinance approved in January approved a zone change, but made the zone change contingent upon execution of the development agreement. At this point in time, the development agreement has not been signed, so the zone change has not taken place. The ordinance is in place, and the ordinance, as it currently stands, means that if the draft of the development agreement approved back in January were to be signed, then the zone change would instantly go into effect. But if that development agreement approved in January is never signed, well, in fact, if it's not signed within 1 year, then the entire ordinance actually expires and goes away. And in the meantime, the zoning on the property continues to be SC3. Okay, so the zoning on the property right now is SC3, not ITOD.
So we just have a motion and vote on it?
That would be fine. Can I make a couple more comments first, George? Is that okay? I just wanted to clarify a couple things. Recognizing that the way development agreements work is that the proffer comes from the developer, right? And that, yes, it's true, at least I mean, I wasn't party to this discussion, so I don't know. There's been a mention today that the draft of the development agreement wasn't given to the developer until the day of, and that's very possible. That's often likely that the actual draft isn't presented until then. But it's my understanding from community development that discussions about the council's historic concern for housing affordability and the ways in which those concerns were affecting council determinations to rezone property had been an issue that had been discussed between the developer and community development for quite some time in going up through this project. And that what was presented to the council back in January was a proffer that was presented to the council as coming from the developer of what they were willing to do in a development agreement in order to address the council's concerns and have the council approve the zone change. So what's now being asked is for the council to actually amend the January ordinance so that that ordinance remains in effect but now refers to a different exhibit. Okay, an exhibit that now changes what the development agreement is. And as shown up here, paragraph C is the relevant paragraph. This is version A of the new proposal. Version B deletes this paragraph entirely and would provide no housing affordability requirement in the development agreement. What this paragraph does is it takes that 10% of the units that it must be income restricted and applies it only to the increase, the number of units built above the 300 already allowed by the SC3. And as you see down at the bottom, if cash in lieu is offered instead of actual income restricted units, it changes the amount for each of those units from from 57,500 to 18,500.
So, I mean, it was very much my feeling at the time that the rezone was appealing if it would include some help for housing affordability in our city. So the idea that it could possibly not have anything, I mean, to add 300 units to the city's housing stock without any housing affordability allowances at all is one thing. And then to think of 500 with the rezone in question without it just seems to me out of the spirit of what I understood I was approving when I was looking at that rezone.
Understood.
So I still think that's very important to us. I think the question is whether or not this particular cash in lieu is enough to really provide that help that we had expressed that we needed and that I thought I was approving when I was approving the rezone. And I sense that that's, I feel unsettled about it.
And so just to clarify, since George had mentioned making a motion, just to clarify, this is already on the agenda for this evening's meeting. And there is, I think it's, double check, I believe it's styled in the chair notes at least as there being an implied motion on the agenda for tonight. The question, though, that has not been resolved and that probably needs to be resolved either in this meeting or in tonight's meeting before the vote on the implied motion actually takes place is what exhibit is attached to the implied motion. Okay. So right now you've got an implied motion on an ordinance that says you are changing the ordinance approved back in January and replacing the development agreement exhibit. That's what the implied motion stands for. But we have not yet specified what exhibit is attached to that ordinance.
Okay, and since we cut George off, let's let George go.
So, a motion to be made that the implied motion will be without C, would be one motion, or the implied motion would be with C. Are those the two choices?
Correct. So I tried to, just to make things more confusing and have more letters to talk about. 3A And the reason why it's 3 is because already back in January, there was already a version 2. So this is version 3. 3A includes paragraph C. In the materials, there's a 3B that does not include paragraph C. Okay? So if someone were to make a motion for 3A to be the exhibit attached, then that would include this paragraph C. If someone were to make a motion to include 3B as the exhibit, then this paragraph is deleted.
Well, I make a motion that we put undivided into 3B.
So those are the only options?
Those are the only options that have been drafted so far with this caveat. Should we? Yeah. Hannah, can you scroll down a little bit more? Now, I know that that information has previously been presented to the council members about paragraph C. It's my understanding, and I don't know how many of the councilors actually know about this, that some concerns have been raised by the developer about paragraph D. Okay? So, this is just bad. I need to figure out a different way to do this. I have drafted, and I have in my files, you have not seen it yet, a 3A version 3 and a 3B version 3 that handle paragraph C in the same way I've just described, okay? But both of those have a completely new paragraph D that are identical. But those of you in Public Works, if you saw my email from like 2 hours ago, they have that language in it. But anyway, that's a whole nother discussion about the sewer issue. But in answer to the other question, those are all of the versions that are currently in existence.
So if we ask for 3B, can we say can Public Works tell us which version they prefer?
Certainly. And Mr. Calder's trying to make a comment, Mr. Hagan.
We haven't had a chance to review, other than just momentarily, what those are and the implications of it. You got to remember, there's some decisions being made that will impact. There's some major problems on this line. Okay, and we're still trying to work that out with the developer. We have a construction project. There's a lot of things going on in play, but there's some unknowns in my opinion, and I haven't had the chance for Mr. Decker to review revisions to, I guess it's paragraph D, as far as what's going on there. So I'm concerned, not knowing, trying to protect the interest of the city, which direction we're moving.
Can I just finish it? The motion then could be 3B with D being one approved by Public Works, right?
Right.
That would take care of your concern. That, in other words, we already approved what you approved.
D is the original one that we agreed with. It's just the revision one that Brian's working on, but I'm not prepared to answer it.
Question. If I could just really quickly answer this question, then we'll go to another question. So yeah, those are the two that are drafted now, but there's no reason that we could not move or instruct another draft to be prepared for tonight. So if we wanted to go with A, but we wanted to change the numbers, that is something that we could make a motion on. Is that about this question?
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I have a question about that, because my understanding is that we have to choose from among what's being proffered.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I would withdraw what I just said. Thank you for that.
So paragraph D, was that in our original agreement in January?
Yes. Yes.
That one's been there.
And to be clear, I don't know. Dixon can probably answer this. I don't even know if the developer has seen the language that I sent out 2 hours ago regarding the sewer issue. So, one of the things we would have to even verify is whether that language is something that they're willing to proffer committing to, and I don't know the answer.
And the language in the original D, that came from Public Works then, right? So any change now is something new, and you have that chance.
Maybe we could discontinue any discussion until tonight, because we don't know what we're voting on. I would move that we discontinue the discussion and see what we get tonight.
I agree, and I'm worried that even by tonight, that I'm not certain that.
Well, to consider it tonight.
But yeah, I think tonight we'll.
Motion, it's already.
I think tonight we'll have a better. we have a better possibility of knowing what we're actually voting on.
How much time do we have left for this, or are we over?
We started late, so don't.
Oh, absolutely.
Just give me that credit.
We're 32 minutes on something that was budgeted for 30, but that's about average for what we've been doing.
My interest at this point would be to hear kind of a repeat of what I heard when I met with Cameron and Dixon, and you mentioned the efforts that you went through, the process that you went through to come up with your latest proffer that was the 18,000, and I just wanted to, if you could go over some of that and explain your rationale and what you did.
Yeah, so again, Cameron Bassett, I'm the owner's representative of the project. The number that was put out in the original proffer that we got the day of the hearing, that was calculated on essentially a percentage of total cost of construction for a unit. And what we came back with was what we typically see nationally when we've gone through this process in the past is there's already an inherent value to how much you're going to spend to build an apartment. What the difference is there is a difference in cost for a lower income housing unit that we would pay the difference between a baseline apartment at an affordable rate versus a full market rate apartment. So the 18.5 is where we found that intermediate cost between the two values of construction. That's essentially the gist of where we came up with that calculation. So I think that's what our offer was, is the difference between the two construction costs.
And then you felt it was also more appropriate to charge it to the 200 units, which would be 20.
Correct. And that was through consultation with the city of what is currently asked of the zone in the first place. Our last approval hadn't requested an affordable component. I think in discussing the options for the ITOD rezone, that was something that was mentioned that would be desirable to council and might help it get across the line. So we thought that was something worth offering. The value on the first development agreement that was published in the Fifth Weekly was $1,000. That was a calculation that was developed through, I believe it was planning, and that was just our response to it essentially after we saw that number. And it seemed more appropriate for the scale of the project.
And that was based on $120 a square foot, 500 square foot unit?
Correct.
Which is total cost of construction?
Correct.
That's not allowing for you to have any value?
Right. So the differential cost is what we're putting forward again, essentially.
Right, and you felt that's more of the industry standard, or?
That's what we see generally in other markets. I can say, yeah, that's generally what we see. I thought that was appropriate.
Thank you.
And can I ask, and that was, that initially we were talking about 300, then we were talking about 500, so I'm wondering what was the logic of deciding to only use this on the 20 units extra? Because the difference of money here is pretty significant,
So
right, for
we-
the city. For us to be able to put towards affordable housing is between $2.9 million and $300,000. So I'm just curious what the logic was to jump from that
So in
distance.
the initial conversation, when we had sat down and talked about strategies on pushing forward the ITOD, the proffer was suggested by planning. Maybe that was helpful. At that point in time in discussion, we had said, yeah, we'd be willing to do that. So it came up as 500. The prior development that we had pushed forward and taken all the way to permit ready had 300 units with no proffer and no low-income housing. So in consultation with the team after we left that last meeting of how we should best respond and not take something too far off the table, was it should be the difference between what you had prior approved with no proffer versus the total that you're requesting now, which is 200 additional units on top of the 300 that had prior been approved. So previously we had 300 approved with no requirement. We have 500 now, so we get into the 200 where we came to that.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble I'm having is that difference, what I thought I was approving, which was much more for us to be able to put towards housing affordability in the city than what we now are looking at.
And I think in our feeling after we saw what the number actually was, is that was much more than we had anticipated as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we hadn't seen that until that evening, and that amount of money, on an economic basis is really impactful to the viability of the project in the first place. So
is there anything in between that was discussed?
I think this was kind of our in-between that we had come back with previously. So this is what I'm approved to push forward as proffer this evening.
So I guess, just to make sure I understand, so you're saying that if you build a unit and you're going, for something in like a project like this, and you're going to sell it at market rate, and then if you were to take that and say, okay, well, instead of selling it at market rate, we are going to discount it so that it's affordable at the 60% AMI, you're saying the gap there is only 18.5.
That's what we were trying to establish, yeah. That was the gap that we were trying to create per unit.
Okay. So the market rate price that you're going to charge for these units will just be what's affordable to 60% AMI plus 18.5.
That's what we're trying to do, yeah.
That seems low to me. Park City is the closest jurisdiction that does this, which are obviously different
very
economics in there. I think they first started, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I believe it was somewhere right around 160,000 per unit, where they were just trying to cover the gap, and then everyone was just paying the fee in lieu, and they said, well, actually, we actually want affordable housing distributed throughout the area. And so I think their fee in lieu is like $300 or something along those lines now in Park City.
Let me address that a little bit. My name's Mark Isaac, and I do a lot of project planning for a lot of equity groups, and I've got a project on Park City Main Street, downtown Salt Lake, Sugar House, everywhere in the state. The difference is they have an ordinance that calls that out. So you program it in your performer before you start, before you buy, before you plan, before you begin. If it doesn't work, you walk. It's not something that you get hit with later that there is no record of, there is no determination of. It's becoming barriers of entry for us to get started. Subsequently, it looks like it does today. We've been trying to get this thing going for 3 years in the hottest environment this state's ever seen, and we can't. We get $2.9 million barrier there, it doesn't go. I think that Dixon met with one of our proposed partners, who's a local developer, BYU graduate, great man, very knowledgeable. He said it's a deal killer. He says if that's an obligation that I'm required to do, I'm not going to participate. So it's a difficult task for all of us. In defense of you guys, Provo has 60% or 62% of the affordable housing stock in the Utah County market. You guys carry a significant burden of what is required in this environment to your betterment. I'm building affordable housing in downtown Salt Lake. It's hard to do. We're full LIHTC. We got the best point total Olene Walker Funds, state funds this year on a 200 South site. It is tough to deliver. It is tough to build. And it's a tough subject. Every one of us wants to do more of it. When it comes in after the fact, you've never programmed for it, and it becomes a real hurdle. You guys can tell that we bought a cash flowing asset with existing leases in place. So you pay premium. It's different than greenfield. It's different than circumstance where the ordinances are in place and you know what you're dealing with. We've spent a tremendous amount of dollars on design and preparation for start prior to, and so each one of these little hurdles that we keep getting hit with are creating continued barriers of entry. The sewer, we haven't really addressed it yet. My standing here proffer is that is so open-ended. That's like Mayor Kafusi saying, I'm going to buy this house, and the city says, well, you don't have any sewer for it. Whoa, wait a second. It's had sewer for it for 10 years. It's been sitting there. Yeah, I know, but now we don't have any. Well, who's going to buy that house? That sewer calc, just as a follow-through, should be based on what it was when we bought it, is baseline. We get to there, and then anything we do above that, you better believe we got to participate in. But to ask us to go to zero after we bought a 30-acre shopping center is crazy. Never seen anything like it in my life. So we're haggling and trying, and it's for all of our benefit. That project will sit idle with a $2 million $2.9 million requirement because it can't afford it if we stayed with the original hurdle for affordable. And that's the truth. So we're back trying to figure out a way that's equitable. The sewer count thing, it's so open-ended. It says, Mark, you have zero capacity on the center. Anything you do there that requires ups in the city, you'll have to pay for it. What if it's a new sewer treatment facility? We don't know what it is. I think you're right, Councilman, in that maybe there's too much to chew on to approve tonight, but we need your help to show progress to the owners, to say your 20-some million dollars that we spent to date is not for naught. The city's trying to help you and we're almost there. That's my ask of you, is that we continue to show progress. I'm not smart enough to know all the answers. I don't think any of us are, but we have to show strides. That's the part that I really care the most about, is that you guys really help us show that collectively we're trying to figure out what's right, because none of us really know what that is. Forgive me for being so verbose, but...
Councilman Jones, just to say one thing on your question if I had seen the language like Dixon did share with me as I walked in. And I think it's difficult with an open-ended count, the way that Mark just responded to go from you have capacity on a existing asset that goes to zero or whatever it is, we don't currently know. What I would ask is, if you're going to move forward, just set the baseline of what the prior design had afforded to it, and any impacts above and beyond that, we understand we'd be responsible for. We put up other offerings out in the last couple of days as well. I believe I sent something through last Thursday as an idea, just to try to get some ideas going. We haven't had capacity given back to us that we can move forward on at this point. But I can't move forward with an open-ended design. We have no idea what it's going to mean for us. It's too impactful. But we should be able to establish a baseline. What was the original center? What was the original off-site facilities afforded to it? Those should be based on that, in our opinion.
So thank you for that, and I think that's entirely fair what you're talking about, and I think we're all interested in being fair and moving forward on something that's going to work well for everyone. Sorry, who was first? Dave. Go.
I'd really like to see this move forward as quickly as possible. So the way I look at it, I mean, there's the issue on the sewer, obviously, that we'll need to get ironed out as quickly as possible. But on the other issue, there's three options. If we stick to the original language and don't accept one of the revised proffers, we get no project and no help for affordable housing. The other option is, I think it was the 3B option, the project moved forward and we get no help for affordable housing. I still like the 3A option, and I appreciate them being willing to offer this, I really do. That we get some help for affordable housing and the project moves forward as quickly as possible.
I would love a version of 3A that I just still am struggling with the gap between 2.9 and 0.4 million. It's a $2.5 million difference. $300,000 plus doesn't seem like that helps us with affordable housing a whole lot. So it feels like a categorically different proffer than what we thought we were looking at. So I'm not clear on why there's no space between those two totals that are not available to us.
So I think what the options we have available is, as Mr. Sewell just articulated, we could say that for the offer that's proffered, we're not willing to make this change, but signal that that we are would be willing to change, move off from the original, but it would need to be something in between or something that we're not willing to change it for what is being offered. And I think that it's a very good point that these requirements were coming in late. These were not known at the time, but since we are talking about a change from 300 to 500, I think that there is some space there for that argument. But I think this is something that maybe we can talk more about this evening.
We need to find out if there's 4 votes for A or B. I'd like the motion that we vote on A or B, with D being open until it's approved by Public Works.
Okay, which one do you want to make a motion for?
I make a motion that we approve for tonight's agenda B with B without C, and with B being contingent on approval by Public Works.
Okay, so make revision.
Hannah, can you, let me jump in here and make this a little bit easier. Hannah, can you go back to File Explorer and show the issue file folder?
Yes.
Okay, so I've renumbered these a little bit to make it a little bit easier. If you can stretch that out so we can see these. Okay. So ignore this one. So 3A, new affordable requirement, no change to the sewer paragraph. 3B, no affordable requirement, no change to the sewer paragraph. 4A, new affordable requirement. So A is always new affordable requirement. There is a change to the sewer paragraph. 4B, no affordable requirement, and there is a change to the sewer paragraph. Okay. Now we haven't discussed at all what the change to the sewer paragraph is yet. Although the sense I'm getting right now is that the language that I included in these version 4s is not actually a proffer from the developer. So
My motion is for 4B. We vote on 4B.
okay, we can certainly do that. Although again, what I just heard Cameron say is that the developer's not willing to do that one. So
If you were willing to write into that language that the baseline to the project was what was previously available to the project.
and I don't have and I guess I would say I don't have a problem with that from a legal concept. The reason why I drafted the language I did earlier this afternoon is because I think my reading of how things are in public works is it would be impossible to come to agreement on exactly how to phrase that today.
The only thing I love Public Works, but if we could defer that to the administration, which obviously then has to confer with Public Works, that would be my only request.
So we're trying to do that by tonight?
So just
No.
So just to be clear, so just so everybody understands what we're talking about, let me tell you what the version, what 4 does. Right now, paragraph D says that future improvements may be needed, and that if they are needed, that the cost of those improvements will be borne by the developer, right? And that these version 4s, what it says is improvements may be needed. The cost of those developments will have to be apportioned at some point, and the developer agrees that building permits and project plan approval will not take place until there's a site agreement that says what that is.
That one is,
That's 4A. That's 4A and 4B.
okay.
Are you okay with that?
Frankly, the conversation I had before the meeting was that even though we had capacity to the site before, that didn't matter. So, no, I can't offer that. What I'd like to have, like I said, is the baseline of your property held a certain amount of capacity to it based on its original design. We went in and spent a lot of money on a new design based on that being capacity with no off-site requirements whatsoever. And now, here we are, we're going a little bit bigger of a project. The difference between what was originally available to the property for sewer capacity, I want to have an establishment of a baseline. And we will pay off-site improvements as appropriate above and beyond what the baseline was available to the property.
And I get all of that.
I think that's reasonable.
I get all that. The issue is just that that's a policy question, not a legal question. And so draft 4 is intentionally intended to do nothing more than kick the can down the road.
Yeah, and I kind of.
Well, that's what my motion is, basically, is exactly that.
Okay.
We're kicking the can down the road on change the sewer.
Okay. All right, so everyone understands what the motion is. The motion is to make 4B the implied motion.
Which includes no affordable housing.
Which includes no affordable housing requirement and just says that the sewer needs to be decided on later.
One thing that I'd like to, on that, I think I am really concerned about the 18.5. And the reason is because we don't have a policy. And what I would also like to include then in that is if we don't have a policy in place for everybody else and every new development that comes in, that would revert back to the developer, because I don't think it's fair for them to just come in and say, oh, we think we hear you want to help. That's uncomfortable for me. It's almost like a kickback.
Gary, that could be a subject of a motion, but let's stay with this motion on this.
Okay.
Well, I would be
okay.
willing, I'd be willing to vote on that also later, but let's not mix those two, please.
Okay, all right, then I know, George, in that case, it's gonna, I know I'm not gonna be able to vote for it, because I am very grateful.
His version, I think, doesn't include the affordable housing.
No, it doesn't include the affordable housing, and I think it's very great, I'm very grateful to them for doing it, and I personally want to accept it. But I want to have a plan for it, and if we don't get that plan, I don't think it's fair for us to take it. So so I'm going to vote against this motion, just because I believe that we don't, it's our fault, we haven't got a plan, but I think unless we do it for everybody, I'm not willing, I don't think we should do it for them.
In the interest of maybe, I know that we're way over time and moving things along, I guess, as I understand what I've heard in this meeting, none of the 4 versions that are on the screen right now are actually acceptable to the developer, because all of them contain sewer provisions that are not acceptable to them. I don't know that it makes sense to make a motion in this meeting, because I think it would be inappropriate to even vote on an implied motion to accept a development agreement draft that has not actually been proffered by the developer.
So even though we're not doing a final vote on it, we're just picking which one we want to discuss tonight.
But I think it's probably a mistake to pick one that they haven't offered.
Okay.
I'm going to withdraw my motion as that's.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
In that case, I would like to make a substitute motion that we make.
I'm withdrawing my motion, it doesn't have to be said.
All right, thank you.
Mine hasn't been seconded, so you're welcome to go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we make every effort to come up with language on that whole section D by tonight, if at all possible, that is acceptable to the developer. Now, just as a layman, I know there's legal complications, but the way he explained it sounded pretty straightforward to me, and you have to agree on what that means and everything, but I'd like to see something that expresses that intent.
I would second that motion.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is that we just request that the administration work with the applicant to find some language that they are willing to proffer for us to consider this evening.
It's uncomfortable, but you're going to help us.
I don't think that can happen, that I'd be comfortable with. I don't.
Well, it's worth trying, and it just seems like we deal with lots of development over the time, over the years, and someone comes in and they go, oh yeah, we're here and we're gonna go there and we're responsible for the difference. That's just normal. What seems to be the difficulty here is setting the number. What was the baseline? And once we set that, I don't think it's a big leap to just say, well, this is what we do for everyone else. We say you are responsible for what's over and above.
I have a real good example of that, Councilman. We tore down the Charles Schwab building, that tire center on the corner. We bought that separately and tore it down. Let's say we're going to open a Verizon cell phone and an R&R barbecue in there. Pretty accurate guesstimate on my part. And the city says we have no sewer service. So you got to do 4 miles of sewer upgrade. We're like, whoa, what happened to the sewer service we had for Schwab? That's all we're asking for. That's the difficulty we have, is as it stands now, we have 0. And so we start to build. We have 9 letters of intent back kindling. We can build 60 or 70,000 feet of retail and start to provide some ancillary support to the guys that are still sitting there by themselves. But we can't if the city says, well, you start with an off-site requirement mark with building 1. And that's in essence what D says right now. So what we're trying to get to is say, let us build back to the square footage that was there originally and kindle the flame. Get the community, the city, and the development world knowing that that thing's active, back, and going to be better than it's ever been, because we've got beautiful infrastructure that the city's already paid for. This bus rapid transit, the widening of University Parkway, and the through traffic into Walmart makes it what it should have been for the past 40 years. We just want to get to that start. Let us get back to there. That's not hard language for us to come up to before we're on 13. Tonight.
Okay, thank you. Was there a second on?
Mr. Sewell.
Okay, so we have a second on this.
Or Mr. Sewell made the motion, and Mr. Stewart seconded.
Discussion on it. Let me just say that I know we're not, this isn't a motion that it will be drafted. It's a motion to request that we attempt to do it. And if nothing else, I hope that that at least shows some progress and willingness to move this forward. So I'll be voting for this motion. Any other discussion on this motion?
And then we'll decide, I'm still confused about whether we end up with the 3A or
That's a discussion.
4A or 4B.
That's a discussion that will be held tonight. Okay. Any other comments? Any other discussion? All right. I will call for a motion, or I'll call for a vote on this motion. All in favor? All those opposed? So that was everyone except for Mr. Van Buren in favor. Mr. Van Buren opposed. What do you thought?
Just so you know, it's really hard to find, you're talking to an engineer here, it's hard to find the base because you've had buildings go in and out of service. I'm trying to define what that base is. Am I looking last year? Am I looking 2 years back? 5 years back? So that is part of the negotiation, trying to figure out what the base is. And meanwhile, during all that, we have had this study that we did, but we found we had capacity problems. We could have been beyond capacity during this base that we're still trying to figure out. So there's a lot of variables that it's not black and white, like sometimes we like to think it is.
Mr. Hardy, can I add a comment there? It might help some clarification. I'm actually okay with the language if the developer really wants to include the language, but I don't think he's exactly knows what he's asking, because the baseline, when the approval happened, the metering study that we've reviewed with the council was going on when approval happened, and that's exactly why that paragraph showed up, is because we suspected we had a problem in there, but we didn't quantify, we didn't know the amount. But we know the amount of I&I that is happening in that, and his baseline is substantially less than what he's anticipating. So we're going to be right back here in the same issue when we establish those numbers.
Well, I guess we just ask that you do your best in the meantime before tonight, and we'll hope for the best, and then we'll deal with what we actually get. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And all right. So we will need to figure out what to trim. Really quick, or should we just push it off to 2 weeks?
Well, it's a real quick ask.
We will go quickly to item number 4. We're only on number 4. Number 4, a discussion regarding the policies and direction for the Foothills Protection Committee. Councilor George Handley.
Okay, we just have a quick ask because we want to start to draft some legislation, but it was our collective feeling that it would be best to just get your go-ahead to draft that legislation to look at more seriously at a later point. And this is pertaining to the gravel pit issue. We're actually looking at other legislative issues that go beyond just the gravel pit issue that we can talk about at a later point. But we're essentially looking at having 3 simple requirements for any project that would, any grading permit request that has a cutting requirement. And that would be that there should be a project proposal that comes in with any permit request for cutting. That there, and this is in part intended to help trigger more oversight over these particular projects so that we can ensure that both engineers and planners are looking at it, and that we're thinking from both sides and both perspectives, so that we don't run the risk of something being occurring that would disrupt planning down the road. The second thing is to increase bonding requirements for grading permit projects. We feel that that may have been a relevant problem in this gravel pit case, and that we would like to have a little bit more teeth to make sure that the work is completed in a way that is satisfactory, and that if there's any temptation to walk away, that we've provided enough disincentives for that.
And this would allow, also because of the project proposal, it would allow special scrutiny to ensure that the projects are completed to expected standards. And then thirdly, to require a landscape plan as part of the project proposal. That will also help to ensure that we know what it's going to look like when it's done, and that we're satisfied with their commitment, and that is something that they're planning for, budgeting for in their request ahead of time. So those are, we just are simply asking for permission to, and if I'm getting this right, Bryce, we're just asking for permission to go ahead with tasking our staff to help us draft something that we can look at in a future meeting.
Do we feel like this needs to update the committee mission?
No.
Mission statement?
No.
All right, so understanding that we're not approving anything, we're just basically weighing in on their suggestion or their plan to move forward. Can I just maybe ask, does anyone have any concerns about this?
Okay.
The only question is the landscaping plan. What standard are we gonna, just like how it existed before the cut was done? Are we gonna require any upgrading or?
We haven't gotten into the weeds on that. But that'll definitely come up. And I should say, you know, at a later point we'll come back. We're meeting tomorrow with some folks from Salt Lake County who drafted an ordinance for Foothills Protection in Salt Lake County that has been adopted by neighboring cities of the county as well, up in Salt Lake Valley. And we're meeting with them tomorrow to sort of look at some of their ideas to see which of them would be applicable to Provo. So we're pretty excited about that conversation, but that'll be the later meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hanley. You only took half your allotted time.
Yeah.
That's going to be the expectation going forward.
We didn't need a vote to say go ahead? That was just a go ahead?
That was a go ahead. There's no objections to you going
No
ahead.
objections, all right.
We have a 5-minute break scheduled.
Yes.
Okay, looks like we'll take it. Please keep it to 5 minutes, and let's start back here at 3:35. reconvene our meeting and move forward. Item number 5 is a presentation on the Community Development Department and potential budget requests. Number 6 is the Public Works Department, and they've requested to go before community development, so we will honor that request and look to Mr. Dave Decker, the Director of Public Works, to lead this item.
Thank you very much, Chair Harding. And I also want to tell Gary McGinn, thank you for accommodating my schedule. I apologize, and especially for the last minute change. I want to acknowledge also Jimmy McKnight, and he spent just tons of time on the budget for Public Works, and I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can. I suspect when we first made this request, we actually asked for an hour, and they scheduled us for 45 minutes, and I'm going to try to do it in a lot less than that to try to get a little bit back on time. And I suspect there's going to be a bunch of questions that you may have, and we may need to come back on specific items and do some more detailed conversation about some of these items. But to try to match what the council staff asked us to do, there were 5 questions that were asked. And the first one is about goals and objectives in the general plan. And we just list the goals and objectives right here, and I'm going to go very quickly down some of the things that Public Works has been doing to try to achieve these goals, but obviously this is a very, very quick review. So goal number 1.4.1, improve neighborhoods. I'm going to highlight that one a little bit later with some slides on pedestrian and bike facilities. 1.4.9, improving the physical appearance and beauty of the neighborhoods. There's a neighborhood sanitation program and items in our sanitation division that we are trying to accomplish. 2.4.1, modes of transportation. I'll just highlight UVX. There are a couple of items in this objective. In the general plan, there's a couple of objectives that are listed, and we actually don't list these in the slide presentation, but one of them indicates use of the state-of-art technology to promote and enable use of automobile and non-automobile transportation. And there was a question raised with TMAC today that might be an interesting topic to have a little bit more discussion, particularly in autonomous vehicles and some other things that are happening in transportation that might be unique to Provo, and so I might suggest that to the council and to TMAC to investigate a little bit more there. I'm going to skip down to 2.4.3, modify the current street standards. We've actually done that just recently with the cross sections. I'm going to skip down to, and I don't know if I'm on the next page yet or not. 4.4.18 is actually on the next page. Maintaining a high quality groundwater resources. This is the responsibility of Gary Calder and his staff. And I just will mention in that area that we have scheduled, I think on May 7th, with the council staff, an ASR conversation with the council specifically. It'll be about an hour long. Aquifer storage and recovery conversation, and so we felt like we were originally going to try to do that today, but I'm glad that we scheduled a separate time for that. 5.4.3 is focusing on the airport and businesses around the airport. As the council knows, we are in the middle of a terminal design, a brand new terminal design, and I feel like we're making significant progress in that area. I'm going to go to the next one, which is 5.4.12. Again, groundwater sources. I've already mentioned ASR. And the next one down also talks about water rights. I have asked for a specific session with the council on water rights. There's some concerns, especially with the upcoming adjudication that the state engineer has gone through Salt Lake County already. We're coming into Utah County, and I feel like it's an important topic to cover with the council. So we'll probably have a specific session just on the future of water rights. And then the bottom one, 5.4.16, maintaining our wastewater infrastructure. The council's probably had enough discussion on wastewater to fill several years' worth of potential conversations about wastewater, and I think you know where we're at on that one as well. Moving forward with the new treatment plant, we're headed for again some additional conversations. So question number 2 and 3, I felt like are actually pretty similar questions, where we're talking about either general fund goals or needs in the department that we feel like are either underfunded or not funded at all. And we just highlighted a couple. And again, this is probably one where we could have a lot more conversation, but just in transportation in general, I've mentioned this before. When I first started here about 7 years ago, we put about $50,000 into sidewalk replacement in the city. We're actually up to $500,000 right now and still not able to keep up with the demands on sidewalks. And when I say sidewalks, it's just pedestrian facilities in general. And so pedestrian facilities is one that one area. Again, when we say roads up there, it's more of a transportation look. I know there's lots of conversations about bike facilities. I actually feel like we do okay in bike facilities. It's not fantastic. We're not making huge strides, but certainly I feel like we're doing a little bit better than the pedestrian facilities. But we certainly could do more in transportation just across the board. Sewer infrastructure is on the list, not because we've identified a specific problem, but more so that I'm just concerned about it. And I've identified this concern before with the council. The administration knows that of my concern. And it's mostly, and you saw a little bit of an example today, it's mostly about demands on the infrastructure. Hey, we're ready for a pipe. We want this facility put in place, tomorrow so that we can build. And we're getting a lot of that request. You saw, I think 2 weeks ago, we showed you a long spreadsheet that Jimmy's prepared where we have individual projects programmed for at least 10 years out. And so those projects will come, but we can't do all of them in 1 year. And the timing is such that we have to, phase those, and we can't do every single project immediately. And that's really what the issue is. Whether it's at the airport, other West Side facilities, whether it's, other developments in the city, we're just getting a lot of requests for sewer improvements, and they need them tomorrow. And that's the reason that it's on the list. It's not that we aren't planning for them, it's just the timing for them. And then just the airport, and again, I mentioned that briefly already. This was one of the documents that I wanted to show you as far as our projects related to transportation. And Dave Graves and his staff actually put this together, and it goes back to 2013. But I asked Dave to identify transportation projects that weren't just road, but they had some other, and we call it active transportation, but there's other names that we could have attached with this, but whether it had a bike facility, a pedestrian facility, or some other mode of transportation identified on the project, I asked Dave to put it on the list, and then if it was a project cost, that kind of to split out the active transportation costs. And you can see the total since 2013, about $163 million in projects, and roughly 63 million of that is in other modes of transportation. So again, I'm feeling like we do okay in those other modes of transportation, but again, I'm sure there's areas where we could improve in some of those other modes. I think the fourth question that was asked by the council staff was what we did with supplemental dollars from last year. So the supplementals that we submitted to the administration and to the council, there were 5 of them. They're listed there. Each of those positions, the first 4 are position related. There's either been an offer made or the position has been filled. We've actually just made an offer to our GIS manager this week. And the upgrade on the radios, the fifth one on the bottom, that is largely completed. We do have a few radios that have not been purchased for the department, but that was a significant item for Public Works, especially when it comes to emergency communication in a where our cell phones or something else we can't communicate. So most of that has been completed. And then maybe this is the fourth question, I apologize. Anyway, one of the questions that was asked of the department, if we had to cut 5% out of the budget, what would we do? And we would probably be forced to look at projects, and again, it would probably be a delay in CIP projects, pushing some of those projects back into the, into those spreadsheets further back into the years, and that's really what we would probably end up having to do. It would certainly be my first response, at least to that question, if that was asked of me. And then, let's see if I can get this to go. There we go. And then the last question that was asked: are there any other budget-related requests that we ought to make the council aware of? And this is where most of the rest of the presentation covers. You can see the supplemental requests that we've turned in this year. Most of them are personnel related. We are, and I can go through these if there's specific questions, but I just want to give you that list, and if there's any real concerns that jump out at you, you'll see this again in the budget documents, I'm sure, and we can have further conversations about this. You'll notice, and I'll point out one request. Actually, two of them are airport related, and I have suggested to Wayne and the mayor that we start to look at the airport, the fact that we're getting a terminal. We are going to need some additional personnel at the airport once that terminal opens, and instead of waiting until the terminal is there and then reacting at that point with personnel, I think it would be appropriate to start making some adjustments in the staffing at this point, and so that's one that I'll point out right now.
Well, explain those personnel changes to me. It's bigger, so what does that mean? Because you design it, you build it, and so I can see it with police and fire. But I don't. Help me understand with your perspective.
So one of the things that one of the positions, there's actually 3 positions that are being modified in the personnel at the airport. One of them is a badging coordinator, and right now we have an administrative assistant that's doing all the usual administrative assistant requirements for, that you'd see in a division. In addition to that, she's acting as the badging official also. So she has well over 700 badging requirements that she has to accommodate. So with a larger terminal, with more people that that are going to be needing that badge, we don't feel like that's an appropriate move moving forward into the future, and so we're splitting those requirements into 2 different positions.
I apologize. I did not know that you were in charge of badging at the airport. So
we do all of that. Brian, do you want to add something?
Yeah, one other thing with the airport, in our current situation, a lot of what needs to be done with the terminal is done by TAC Air because they own the building that the terminal is in. With a new terminal, that changes slightly. And so a lot of the responsibilities that the TAC Air is handling now will be handled by Provo City. So there's some additional.
So that would mean like the shovel, the snow removal and things like that. The TAC Air.
It's more related to the building operations and the
Cleaning the building, even just basic stuff with the building.
Well, and we're running the airport with 3 individuals on the field, the airfield. So part of it's snow removal, part of it's just general maintenance. It's keeping the baggage claim stuff going, which right now is all done by TAC Air because it's their building, but we're going to have the building and be responsible for it. So.
Thank you. That helps me.
May I make a comment? One of the interesting things when we are so happy about a new airport, police and fire, and now this, I think sometimes we're excited. You've got to be careful what you ask for, because it's going to increase the budget substantially.
Well, it's definitely going to make an impact, and I'll come back and talk a little bit about revenues at the airport in just a second. But it's exciting I remember in the previous city that I worked for, they were always excited to build parks, but it was always hard when I had to come back and say, yeah, but we got to hire people to maintain those parks too. So it's always neat initially, but you got to keep up with it too. So. We were also asked to talk about some accomplishments, and again, I'm not going to go through the list. You can read the list. If there's anything that you've got a question on, I'd be happy to address them. A few pictures of the accomplishments. This is Duncan Aviation from the air, and the Lakeview Parkway up by the high school. The high school's near the top of the picture there. This is a storm drain. This is a road, and I think we actually included, if this is the right road, I think it is. This was thrown on there mostly because the residents on 820 North suffered through, I think, 5 years of construction east of 9th East. They went a long time on this road, and we finally got to the point where we could finish it and overlay it, and it looks really nice. So I felt like we needed to highlight that more so for the residents than anything else. So they've been really patient with us in that area. As far as upcoming projects, again, just a list, and I'm not going to run through any of them in great detail. I've highlighted a few of them. We'll talk a little bit more in the ASR meeting about the 4-year water plan. I've mentioned the new wells, a few other items. I think 500 West and Bulldog we've talked enough with the council about, so we're going to try to keep moving here. Consolidated fee schedules that we're suggesting, mostly again at the airport. A few of them will increase some revenue in a relatively positive way. The fuel flowage fee, we're suggesting going up by 2 cents. It will generate about $20,000 annually. The parking fee, we've left it blank right now, but I've made a recommendation to the administration that, again, instead of waiting for a new terminal to be built and then making a substantial jump in parking, that we probably ought to take that up at least gradually for the next 2 years. So I'm going to recommend probably a 50-cent increase parking. It will generate about $20,000 more annually for the airport. Now for the really good news, budget-wise, the rate increases for Public Works, we have had these. This is actually I think this is the last year of the five-year plan that we had recommended. You are going to see some recommendations for budget or for rate increases from Public Works. The water is 5%, wastewater is 15%. You can see the changes individually there. Also in stormwater, there's a I think it's an 80-cent increase recommended in stormwater. Sanitation does have an increase recommended, and if there's one that is on my list that we probably ought to come back and talk in depth with the council, it's probably sanitation. This is an area where we spent quite a bit of time last year and talked about the rate, the way the rates are set, but we probably ought to spend some more time on sanitation before the budget's approved. Just some comparisons with water, and again, I think the council sees these each year, but just a reminder, any city that has an asterisk by it right here, that means that last year they adjusted their water rate, or that particular rate, that utility rate, and our rates are shown with the proposed rate increase compared to last year's rate that those cities have. So it's a little bit of a skewed comparison, so that this assumes that if no other city made an adjustment this year, this is where we would sit. But we don't know that those other cities are not going to make adjustments, and you can see again by how many did make adjustments last year. So that's water. This is sewer, where we're at right now, and again, we've made some recommendations to the administration, to the council, that that rate will continue to go up pretty substantially for the next, I think it's 3 years, and we can review that again with the council during the budget. Stormwater, you can see where we're at again on stormwater. And then in sanitation, and again, that's primarily the reason that I made the comment that I did about perhaps this is an area where we need to have some conversation. And again, one of the concerns that we have is we have kind of an opt-in. If you remember this conversation, we have an opt-in process for recycling and for green cans, and whether that's the right thing to do or not. I don't want to spend a bunch of time right now talking about it, but we may need to revisit that conversation. And then just overall, the 4 public works utilities compared to those other cities in their public utilities, and we're about in the middle of the road. And then just a reminder very quickly about the multitude of funds that Public Works has to operate. And again, there's sometimes a question about how some of these funds interact with each other, B&C road funds, and how they work with UTF. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there's anything right now that you have, or during the budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dave, with April here, May, the heat starting to come, what do you see as far as flooding and things like that, and the water situation that we're in? Do you see anything any concerns?
So right now, I think most of you probably know, and it's actually on my list to have Brian send out a little bit of an update on snowpack. I don't know if it's going to be Gary or Brian, but we'll get some information on snowpack. But we're well above average. On some of the snow reporting stations, we're near 140%. Some of them aren't quite that good. And as I visited with Wayne, particularly on flooding, most agencies are telling us that they don't anticipate a lot of flooding. Now, I have a little bit more concern than what I'm hearing from other water agencies. My biggest fear is we're seeing a pretty moderate spring in temperature-wise, and what I really would not like to see is come the end of May, we're still moderate temperature-wise. We get a lot of rain in May, and then it turns 90 plus degrees June 1st. We're going to be in trouble. And Deer Creek is only 7 feet down. Now, I know Jordanelle has a lot of storage available to store extra water, and that's the purpose. That's one of the primary functions of Jordanelle Reservoir, was to actually prevent flooding from happening. So it's yet to play out, and there's a lot of variables, but I don't think we're out of the woods yet by any means.
The Rock Canyon water will just go down in that catch basin? I mean, I'm assuming we'll have the river going through there, right?
Yep, Rock Canyon has not come down, to the mouth yet. I haven't really seen it at least on a consistent basis. Slate Canyon, I've watched it, and again, it's not really running, anything down. The temperatures have not gotten hot enough to start that upper snowpack melt really going. And again, my biggest concern is you get a really, really warm early June, and that'll start it off. I made up some time.
Yeah.
That's it.
Appreciate it. Any questions, any kind of questions? Thank you, Mr. Decker.
Thank you.
Back to item 5, a presentation on the Community Development Department. Proposed budget requests presented by our own Mr. Gary McGinn, Director of Community Development. This is budgeted for 30 minutes, but I don't know if you want to give a little preface that you gave me earlier.
I'm going to go through this pretty quickly and rely on you to stop me and ask questions if you would like. And I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about goals and policies of the general plan. We think the goals and policies that you have in the general plan that are set out that involve us with communities, neighborhoods, working with other departments on transportation, those issues. I think we're doing a good job of those, and we're using the monies that you've given us wisely to improve the quality of life in Provo for the residents. So having, there we go. So at community development, we have several main divisions. We have building inspection, planning, property management, ombudsman, parking, sustainability, and zoning enforcement. So let's go ahead and start with zoning enforcement. And
Is it not working?
oh, there we go.
Sorry, the zoning enforcement, is this the slide you want?
Yep.
Yeah, that'll be great.
That's one way to enforce zoning, is just cut off the electricity.
We could make that work.
So what this is last year, you gave us 2 additional employees in zoning enforcement to do some things. And we had the rental housing disclosure ordinance that came into place, and publicizing that ordinance and the different things that we dealt with there. Thousands of rental dwelling disclosure forms we have worked with people on. And when I say thousands, I mean thousands. We have done a tremendous amount of volume of work out there with people. And, okay, there we go. In our zoning cases, between July of last year and now, you can see the numbers of cases that have come open as we've gone in. What we didn't prepare today, and we didn't have time to go through with the limited time that we have, is comparisons to last year. One of the key things I think you would be interested in is with the new enforcement people, what have you been able to do with it? How has that worked? And our numbers actually are a little bit down. And we think one of the main reasons for that is the zoning disclosure. As that went out, we had many instances as we worked with people about an understanding and spent a lot of time and effort in that area. People started to, I don't even have a license. And they would come into compliance, or they would come into a voluntary, I'm overoccupied, I didn't realize that. I'm going to come into compliance. And so I think that ordinance, though it was kind of a difficult ordinance to go through, I think now looking back on it, was a good experience, and it was successful for the city. And I think we're seeing a reduction in occupancy cases and rental issues around rental cases, in a large part because of the zoning disclosure. And we're still going to have enforcement issues that we deal with, obviously, with that, but I think it's been a big success. And since the initial implementation of it, we really haven't had a lot of controversy or trouble with it. And it seems to be operating well from what we're hearing. Okay. The other thing that the 2 enforcement officers allowed us to do is keep continuity in our cases as we go forward in our cases, and we might have someone maybe get a promotion in-house or go on and get a different job somewhere else. We'd have a dip, and now we're able to maintain consistency with our enforcement much better. It's a much more even approach, which is what we like to see. So I think that's been successful. And this might be an area here in the future. Yes, question?
Just before you move from the slide, I don't know if you want to finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say this may be an area that the council would like a little more detailed discussion in the future. But for purposes of the budget presentation, we're keeping it at a very high level. And Carrie is here if you have any burning questions.
Okay. So I think I had 2. First is I'm thrilled to hear that might be successful. It has been quiet, at least I haven't been getting much feedback on it, either positive or negative.
Carrie, do you have anything on that and what you've been hearing on the disclosure?
I actually think it was a really great thing because, like Gary said, one of the things that we found is we would have people calling in and wanting to get their disclosure forms, and we would look them up and they wouldn't even have a license. And so then it was like, well, you need to apply for your license, and we had a lot of people that were coming in and applying for licenses, and then they would get their disclosure forms. Now, we have quite a few, I don't know if it's still in the slide or not, but there are almost 3,000 active licenses that we have currently, and that include, many of them include multiple properties. There are still quite a few that have not contacted us for disclosure forms, but as we have staff and time, we work through those to address that and reach out to these people.
I hit a button and I moved off that other page, and I don't know if I can go back this way. Oh, there we go.
One other thought on that, it seems like years ago, I was in the city, we instituted the RDL.
Yes.
And there was a big push, and we kind of got on top of it, and then it seemed like over the years, people have, through transitions where people were slowly falling off, and we weren't bringing the new people in. So I don't know if we need to send flyers every couple of years, or, I mean, what, I think we need to be thoughtful of how to.
One of the things you're going to see on the next slide is the fact that since last July, with 6 staff members, we have done about 450 inspections on rental properties. That is, in our code, we're allowed to do an inspection every 3 years or whenever there's a complaint. So we are seeing a huge, you probably don't remember last year's slide, but in the time frame that we had listed, which was from July 1st, 2017 to April 2018, we'd only done about 75 inspections. So this is a huge...
What number was it last year?
75.
And the more current number?
450.
450, yeah, right.
So that's about 75 per inspector. And that includes initial inspections as well as follow-up inspection. And so I think that as we are reaching out and we are contacting individuals about their 3-year inspections, the properties are getting contacted and they are being informed that, hey, we are still doing licensing. We are still reaching out, and I have other plans for other outreach.
And with that, BYU, the Realtors Association, Landlords Association, they're all very aware of it and they're all talking about it. And people are much more aware of the zoning disclosure rule, and I would say even more so than RDLs were when they first came in, 15 years ago.
And then if we can go back to the slide, I just want to understand these numbers real quick. So that 590, is that how many were open at the beginning of the period plus the ones that were open during the period?
No, just the ones that were open between July 1st, 2018 and today.
And then the...
So,
go ahead.
And then the ones that are currently open are 319. So that number could involve older cases. Okay, that 319. So
something opened in June last year that's still open
Yeah.
is included in the 319.
I was just adding the 271 and the 319, which adds up to exactly 590, and so that's why I was wondering if, were there no open cases before then, or are there exactly the same number of cases that were open?
There are. That's actually, it's probably, I did it wrong. That's not uncommon. And the same thing with the occupancy. So I just have some really brief. So like, let's see. Sorry, and I don't want to take up a lot of your time. So just looking at occupancy cases. So in 2017, that's calendar year 2017, there were 1,042 total code enforcement cases. Out of those, 170 of those were occupancy cases. Okay. In 2018, there were 822 cases that were opened, and out of that 822, there were 134 cases that were occupancy.
And this could be the deeper dive that we could do at
Right.
a later date.
Could I ask you, this year, the 590 that were open, 319 are still open, and 270 were resolved
Yes.
of those 590?
Yes.
You're only addressing those cases?
For that time period, correct. And I can, like Gary said, we can do a deeper dive and I can get you more statistics, better statistics.
Thank you.
And then this is with the inspection, and that 450 inspections actually involves quite a bit of time. And so that's a significant time commitment by the staff of community development to be able to do that. Okay, we also do building inspection. And with that, we do plan review, field inspections. You want to build a building, you bring in your plans, we review it for code compliance. You get a permit, you start building, we inspect for code compliance, make sure it's safely built. And then any appeals and things that from that situation go to the Board of Appeals. And that's a board that we have. This slide is our 5-year building permit average, and probably the most interesting parts of this are, if you look in 2016 with commercial buildings, it's $290 million valuation of commercial buildings. It's primarily the hospital. You build 2 towers, it's quite expensive. BYU, the engineering building, that's also a very expensive building to go in. So you can see the total valuation of new construction or remodeling in Provo City done in 2016 was over $360 million. And that's a little bit of an outlier of a year. And then as you come along, then in 2017 we did 121 million and then 109 million. So far this year we're at 93 million, and that's just calendar year. So we think we're on track for a pretty big year. Now, what this also tells us is if we're really busy down here, we're really busy in planning and zoning too, because since there's a lot of construction and things and projects going on, the planners are busy, zoning is busy dealing with related issues. You can also see single-family homes, 20 in 2015, 14 in 2016, and then we go to 70, 82, and so far this year we're on track for 58. So we are anticipating we'll have more single-family homes this year than we've had in 5, 6, 7 years being built.
Are they going into new developments, or are they just kind of fill in mostly?
Probably primarily new developments, but there's also a lot of approved subdivisions out there with vacant lots that people can come in and build on that haven't been built yet. Doesn't necessarily mean it's brand new subdivision. Okay, and then you see a bunch of zeros and things with our conversion over to City View. A lot of the data, we're getting the big stuff, but we're working on just getting City View to work correctly and get what we paid for. And we haven't had time to go in and really configure and get a really good detailed information out of City View. Hopefully by next year we'll be able to have much more detailed, useful information for you. Okay. All right, so in planning, we have a whole bunch of boards and commissions. We do current and long-range planning and historic preservation. So some of the boards and commissions we have: Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment, Design Review, Transportation Mobility Advisory Committee, and the Landmarks Committee. And so all of those boards and commissions operate through community development. And planning, the current planning, they deal with rezones, text amendments, subdivisions, project plans, conditional use permits, licensing, and they process a tremendous amount of applications and projects and things through the current planning. Long-range planning, things like that, or the general plan. We did the land use map on the west side. The west side's being worked on right now. There's a river corridor plan that's just starting up, trying to, for years, the city frankly viewed the river as, I think, something to be feared, and we turned our back to it and tried to contain it rather than using it as an amenity to the and an asset to the city. So we're trying to deal with that, and we also deal with the FEMA maps, dealing with floodplains. Okay. there we go. Historic preservation. Provo actually has a pretty good historic preservation program and homes on the registry. We have our walking tour June 13th and 14th.
That's this year?
That's this year, those dates. It's actually a very interesting tour, and we try to put it in different areas of the city. People open up their homes, let you come in, you learn a little bit of the history. We also have our app that you can download on iOS and Android that goes through and looks at things. The Landmarks Commission was helpful with the Amanda Knight Hall, trying to help that be preserved. BYU ended up selling it to someone who's going to preserve it. And this is Provo then and now. We've had over 45,000 views of that. And that's something that the Landmarks is doing about some things in Provo. So get on Facebook, type in Provo. This is Provo then now, or YouTube, and you can see some of the things that are going on.
Well, I guess I missed that. So BYU did sell it to
Yes.
someone that's going to preserve it.
Yes, they did.
That's awesome.
And we were able to get information and help that process along. So, and Landmarks, some individual members of the Landmarks Commission met with the president of BYU and explained kind of the background of Amanda Knight Hall and why they thought it was something worth preserving, and BYU was able to do that. So they've sold it, and one of the conditions of the sale was to preserve that building. And so we're now working with them through a process to, when you take a historic building like that, there are things that we can do under the building code whilst still making it safe, yet to make it feasible for them to rehabilitate it so that it can be used with a different use and continue its life. One of the worst things for a historic structure is to be vacant. One of the best things that can happen to a historic structure is actually for a new use to go in, for it to be used. And so we're glad to see Amanda Knight Hall continuing to be used.
Residential? Is that the planner, are they allowed to say that, yes? Is it looking to be residential? Or?
Probably, yeah. Property management, ombudsman. The ombudsman function is if someone has a difficult situation in the city that kind of slips through the cracks, they can contact our ombudsman, and it's something that is kind of a step beyond 311. Normal questions and things like that, we encourage people to go to 311. If it's an unusual or unique situation, then they can go to the ombudsman. Also, our ombudsman, Tara, is our property manager and has been working with MAG and helping them acquire property on 800 North, preserve that corridor. The regional sports park has put in a tremendous amount of work on that. Every road that we go out and purchase property for, every sewer line we put in, every stormwater line we put in that needs an easement or a right-of-way for that, we work through those issues and help get the property for the city. Parking, wayfinding, parking lots, enforcement, a lot of things going on with parking. Downtown parking availability, I think you've seen this before. We actually had this done back in, I think, 2016. We did these, this is basically a heat map of how much parking and where it's being used. If you look in the downtown area, we have thousands of parking spots available. But the problem is a lot of people don't realize it, and we have less, even in the busiest times, less than 60% of the available parking is actually being used in Provo. Anecdotally, the LDS Church was looking at their new structure downtown, the temple, looking for more parking. One of their people from Salt Lake went around just to look at parking availability, came back and said, "You guys have so much parking in Provo." And so one of the things dealing with it is wayfinding. In the past, we've tried to help with event management and temporary wayfinding sign. A map that you can see online, go to parking.provo.org. You can find some of that. We also are wayfinding. We have let out the contract. We have someone coming in to finish some wayfinding for us. That's at the end of this, you'll see some of our needs, and some of that is we have a supplemental request in for wayfinding to complete that. Okay, parking, we're looking at parking lots. We're also looking at shared parking lots. You can see like the town square parking garage has now been branded with Provo City Parking. We also have a data map showing enforcement and where the parking tickets are being written and for what they are written. And if we have more time, this map takes us to a link to the site where you can see that. Again, that's on our website. Long-range plan, we need to complete wayfinding. We need consistent and enhanced enforcement. Enforcement actually is in 311, that division. To really get the kind of enforcement that we think we need out there, I think Karen has made a supplemental request for more equipment and things like that, and we think that needs to happen. As long as we don't have wayfinding completed and we don't have consistent and enhanced enforcement in problem areas, parking is, well, we have to solve those two things before we really can take any other steps, because if we don't have them solved, we don't know if taking additional steps makes sense or it will be effective. Long range also, we need to explore shared parking. We're currently working on ideas where parking lots aren't used at certain times with not only in the city but with private property owners, that maybe in the evenings or certain times they could allow parking on their property and allow people with permits in areas, especially in the Joaquin area, where they need where there's a lot of parking on the street, that this could be a revenue generator for the property owner and help us with a solution there. At some point, we will probably need to explore parking meters once we have the wayfinding and the enforcement well in hand. Also, we probably need to explore graduated parking fines. That's probably a weakness we have. But once we get the enforcement piece done, we'll have a little better information on that of what it should be and what would make sense. And permit areas. Additional permit areas are probably things that need to happen. Sustainability, probably the biggest issue with sustainability is the new city center being built and what will happen there. There's a citizen sustainability committee, the employee sustainability committee, and with sustainability report. The big issues facing us in the future are demographic changes, population, redevelopment of existing areas in the city, infrastructure issues.
Are you seeing a lot of the demographics? I know we were concerned about losing a lot of young single professionals. Is that stabilized?
Well, I don't have any numbers on if we are losing young single professionals. I keep hearing some people say, well, I'm a young single professional, I'm going to leave Provo. It's just so far anecdotal. I haven't seen anything that really leads me to believe that that's really happening. Our rental rates are very low. So all the rental properties we have. I can tell you with single professionals, we may not be, one of the things that you had earlier on the earlier side said housing types. We do need to explore more housing types and just either student apartments or single-family homes are not the answer. We need to have more townhomes, more garden apartments, things like that, that would be interesting to more demographic profiles than just mom and dad and kids or single students. So that's something as a city we need to look at. With zoning, some of the issues there, we could use some more secretarial help, a lot of the paperwork and things that we're dealing with. Also, enforcement officers. If we had more enforcement officers, we could put them to use. The question that I have really for the council is, with what we've been doing, and this is where we may need to have a deeper conversation about this, is it's kind of like the police department. I can, in their traffic division, I can tell you somebody's going to speed in Provo today. But is speeding in the problem areas being handled appropriately, and is there enough enforcement generally? And that would be our question for the council. There is plenty of work out there, but zoning enforcement also is one of those things. Be careful what you ask for, because oftentimes my experience with zoning enforcement is people want really hard, tough ordinances written, but they don't want them really enforced unless it's a problem situation. And that's hard for us to do. Either if it's a violation of the code and we find out about it, we have to do that enforcement.
That's where, to me, parking permit programs can help. Because if it's over occupancy and you do the permit program that tends to limit how many cars each unit can have, then it kind of solves itself a bit.
Yeah, one of the worst ways to do zoning or occupancy enforcement is by doing occupancy enforcement. There are other ways of doing occupancy enforcement that can get at the same issue, but without doing individually, proving in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt how many people live there. And some of those issues are dealing with the externalities.
We have about 1 minute left on the time.
Okay, and then parking enforcement. That's it.
Whoa, wow. Parking enforcement and zoning enforcement, I believe, were two of our 3 priorities that we were looking to the administration to address. So, great. Okay, any questions for Mr. McGinn? Thank you for that presentation. All right, so in the next 30 seconds, we have 3 more items. Number 7, a discussion on, and we do have a closed session requested. So,
How much time Mr. Walter needs?
Probably about, it depends on how many questions, but I'd say it'll take about 10 minutes to brief and then take questions.
Okay.
So we'll want to.
There's two items. One of them is based on some developments today. It's going to be much shorter than it was otherwise intended to be. So we can probably do the closed session in like half an hour.
Okay.
That would be my guess.
So let's see how efficiently we can.
I'll be brief. So we're going to talk about this tonight, so I can just say the mill race project is being proposed down between 5th South, 6th South, 1st West, and University. It's a project that we are really excited about in community development. It's kind of the mixed-use downtown project that we were envisioning when we wrote the downtown plan. It's providing a variety of housing types, variety of unit sizes, while keeping in spirit with the ITOD zone, the ITOD transit-oriented development in the general plan. Few minor differences is the building height is higher than what the ITOD would allow. The minimum average unit size is a bit lower than what the ITOD would allow. And there's some more stringent design standards written into this ProZone that they've put forward. But we feel that it meets the general plan, it meets the idea for downtown, and we're excited to see it progress.
I see it says 8-story office building. Is that 8 stories on top of the parking podium? I've seen 12, I've seen 14 stories.
So yeah, in total it'd be 9-story office building on the southeast corner of the property along University and 6th South. The parking podium, the latest concept they have is 5-story parking podium. So that brings us to 14 stories from ground to the top of the office building. That'd be the tallest portion of the project. They'd have a condo building on the northeast corner, which is lower, and then the apartment buildings towards the west. Perfect, thank you. So there's the tall building. They've got this wrap building here. That'd be, I believe, 5 stories, and then the same with those.
What do they mean by wrap building? Just that it's...
Yeah, so it puts a face on that parking deck. It provides a nice transition for these apartments here. They have really nice proposed open areas through the block. So putting that wrap there really shades you from that parking.
So it says condos.
Yes.
They really will be for sale?
Yeah, so condos for sale, great amenity spaces for those condos and the apartments, shared amenity space, including rooftop,
So which
clubhouse.
ones would be apartments? The buildings to the west?
Right. These are apartments here.
Okay.
Different units, sizes, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, studios.
So it has a mix, as in some will be for sale.
Correct.
And you also have potentially a chapel.
Yes, they are in talks with the LDS Church about a downtown, probably 2-story within the office building.
Just with the, that's been several times, so I'm wondering, like, is there written anywhere about how many of those condo units will be owner occupied, or is that just whoever comes and buys it?
No, of course, just like any property in Provo, somebody can come buy up 10 of them and rent them out.
So some properties in Provo have restrictions on how many can be.
Sure, CCNRs
You're right.
have been
So I was
provided
just
in the past.
curious.
Yeah, they haven't spoken of that.
Like if it goes below 50%, then you're not eligible for certain financing.
Yeah, and I know they are seeking different types of affordable financing options and things like that. So those are all details to be worked out in the project plan. Right now, there's asking for the text and for the zone.
And I thought that in a previous meeting that Mr. Walter, who's now here and can weigh in if I'm wrong, had mentioned that there was intended to be a development agreement on this project, but I...
So there is, and they are, so there's a development agreement plus an owner participation agreement that would be with the Community Redevelopment Agency. Since there's a portion of the property that the agency owns that would be a part of this ultimately. So there are at least 2 more documents. In the development agreement, there is language about if you, for every 5,000 square feet of office space that is rented, they are willing to provide an apartment unit at 70% of area median income.
So just whether you want to talk about that again tonight or not, you've got the 2 agenda items tonight. Creating the zone can happen irregardless of the development agreement, but applying the zone to the property should probably not happen if a development agreement is desired in order to do that. So.
Thank you, and I appreciate your help in making sure that we state things properly.
Could you explain how the height limits vary in the downtown area among the various zones? Like this new one, the ITOD zone, and then along University Avenue, like where the Zion's flag building is and stuff?
Sure. So in the ITOD zone right now, I believe it's 100 feet. This building is, or the zone they have proposed, brings that to 195 to fit the project that they desire. Downtown, I believe, is also currently 100 feet in the general downtown zone. But more than building height, that's restricted by the space of the parcel and the parking that they would need to provide. Amenity space really holds them to a height more than the building height requirement does. The tallest buildings you're seeing are the hospital, and that's in the PF zone. So they amended that PF zone to allow a higher height there.
Just a quick follow-up. So the reason for the question, I mean, it sounds like we've got this one block in the city where the height limit is almost twice where it is everywhere else? Is that the proposal?
I need to check the downtown core, so the DT2 zone, to see if that is the same as general downtown. I want to check on that for you before tonight. But yeah, it is higher than anything that's built downtown. But we see the downtown growing and changing that direction.
One last follow-up. The reason I'm asking that is I'm just thinking about a level playing field. Are we anticipating that the limit would maybe change in some other areas as well, or is this one developer going to have this special,
Well, I think initially the DT1, DT2 zones that were put into the code several years ago, there wasn't a demand for a higher building than a 5-6 story building at the time. But with the changing dynamics of the city, I think we might see more of those requests.
The background on that, a couple of things. Before the DT zones came in, there was no height limitation. And in Provo, you could have as high of a building as you could possibly get. Now, as a matter of fact, we modeled for the council the Chrysler building actually fit nicely on one of our blocks, and you could have built it if you could have just parked it. That was the difficulty, is parking for the Chrysler building. And so there was no height limitation. When we went in and started the DT zones, at that time, some members of the Planning Commission and the Municipal Council were a little concerned about height and things like that, and we said, oh, okay, we'll just limit it. We would have preferred there be no limitation in these core areas, and that if somebody can come in and build a 20-story building, great, and if not, then that would be great. And so just to not have controversy and go through, we said, yeah, okay, let's put that in. But that's never would be a recommendation that we would say. I think both Dave and Dixon just looked it up. It's what, 180?
Yeah, that's DT2.
DT2 is 180.
And then the other is 100.
And so to avoid controversy, we just said, yeah, okay. And the reason for that is, at the time, with some Cal Thorpe and Associates out of Portland who'd come in with UTA and done some studies, they saw for at least the next 5-6 years there probably wouldn't be anything over 5 stories built. Just the economics of it would prevent higher buildings. But now I think we're seeing a turning of the corner. If the economy keeps up the way it is, we could start to see higher buildings. And so this is something that I would propose we would go back to in the future, is look at DT 1, 2, and some of those areas, and frankly take off the height limitations.
So there is a proposed project that Brandon Fugel has announced but not gotten approval for yet, called University Tower on the Wells Fargo, and that block, it's I think 13 or 14 stories tall. It would be in excess of 100 feet. And then the new courts building, I believe, is also taller than 100 feet. Of course, state buildings don't have to meet our requirement, but
and it is in the downtown core.
Okay.
Just a heads up, I have been hearing from some of the neighboring businesses, and they like the proposal, but they're just a little uncomfortable because the proposal kind of creates this large envelope and puts the cap at 195, even though it's only proposed to be 195 on the east side. It doesn't say that it has to be only on the east side. The proposed language could be all the way to the west side, where you're now up against a 3-story startup building, and so that they were worried about that. And so I know that they've had some discussions, and I have concerns about that. So that might be an area that I'd be hoping that the developer would commit themselves to building what they're proposing, rather than the language of the
If I may, I had the opportunity to be present at a meeting with the developer and Mr. Taylor, as well as some others Friday afternoon regarding this issue. And the developer is fine with, however, whatever mechanism we're good with, whether it's changes to the development agreement or deed restrictions or whatever that would keep the height along University Avenue and not bleed over into 100 west or 500 south and 600 south.
So I just wanted to make the rest of the council know that there are some of these discussions that are taking place. And then before we really get into the fun, but I have to throw out, I think it's funny that we wrestled about these minimum unit sizes and whatnot, and I believe this is the first one that has come to us since then, and asking to waive it entirely. So, any other thoughts on this item? Okay, excellent. I guess we got Brian for items 8 and 9. Take it away, Brian.
Thank you. Just real quickly, I think the important things on item 8 dealing with the John Dester project, just making sure we're all on the same page on those numbers. In the PD zone, it's an overlay zone. It allows attached single-family homes and allows them to be clustered down. What you do is you first establish a base density, and for a while we weren't sure what that base density was. The base density, after we've looked at several configurations, several plans, we've really established at 12 units. The bonus density you obtain by meeting certain, checking the box and doing certain things that qualify for that doesn't change. Based on his acreage and what the coefficient is you do for an R110, he can get 6 units. So the proposal is for 18 total units. It does change some of the things in the staff report relating to parking. We mentioned that for attached dwellings and for elderly housing, it's a certain percentage of what it would be for single-family detached. If you reduce the number we used originally down to 12 and then look at the 65%, which is the high end of that, it's actually probably much less than that on a percentage, but that would equate to probably 6 fewer parking or 6 fewer trips per day for the clustered housing than it would be for the single family. So it's much closer, but again, that's taking almost the extreme on what it would be for the clustered housing.
Can you say that last part again about vehicle? Sorry.
Yeah, the trip generation is based on just on the ITE formula or even using Provo standards. For single-family homes, there's a certain number. In ITE, it's usually 10 to 12 trips per day for single-family detached. Provo uses around 17. For attached housing or especially elderly housing, it's really a percentage of that number. Generally, it ranges between probably 45 to 65% for attached and between 30 to 40% for elderly. And so we took the 65% being the high end. If you take 65% of the 17 and then multiply it by the 18 units to
Are you saying older people drive less?
They drive together. They share. They go with their neighbors, go with their spouse, so they travel together a lot.
It is true other way.
Yeah, and they don't have to go to soccer games. Well,
Brian, are they going to have engineers tonight that can talk to us about what these numbers actually mean? There's a lot of concern and fear around, but what does this mean? 17 cars, that's 17 steps. And so if we can actually have somebody come and explain what that actually means, maybe cars per hour. I have some of those I've heard, and I would just like to verify some of those as we go ahead.
Yeah, and then certainly it's greater during the morning when you're going to work and in the evening when you're coming home. So there are surges.
Okay.
People describe this to me as high density. This would be considered high density, wouldn't it?
No. Our low density residential zone's 15 units per acre. This is still way under that.
The other thing that I saw as you flip through those pages, it said 5 4-unit buildings, and apparently that's not the case.
Right, this one, you'll see an example tonight, that those 2 units are gone, so you only have these 2 units here. You won't have this drive, which we think is a good thing, you're not right next to the street coming out, so that's kind of a plus for that.
So
Just to clarify, what was the number you came up with for the trip count estimate for the attached units? It sounded like it was around
65% of 17?
around 11 or something, or?
Oh, for the ITE manual, it's generally it's between 10 and 12 is in that manual. Provo City, however, uses around 17.
That's for
They went out
for
and
a
did
single
actual
family.
counts of neighborhoods
Right.
and everything else.
And so what's your estimate for these?
So if you did if you did 17 trips, that's based on the 12. If you multiply the 12 by 17,
Right.
204-ish or whatever. If you did these, if you take 65% of that 17, because what those manuals tell you, and from these other studies, is the attached homes at the most are generally about 65% of what single-family detached would be. So basically taking 65% of the 17 trips per day and then multiplying it by 18 units would give you the other number, roughly.
Which is within 6.
Yeah.
So it's basically a wash if you use
Well, still
a high
with less, in theory.
If you-
I would argue that those they're probably less than 65%. Just on the nature of other developments we've had. And the basis, again, emphasis, mention that too, is staff's recommendation. The basis for it is the general plan goal, which states offer a range of housing types within neighborhoods that meet the changing needs of an aging population, facilitate long-term residency. If you recall, the baby boomer generation was always expected to be a big surge. That's happening now. And the housing needs, and you could even take your area, the southeast neighborhood, and I think you were talking about it before, creating attractive alternatives to house the other population, which then, in theory, frees it up. Now, we're not saying that everybody in this neighborhood is going to move to this area, but, as you do that through the city, it should facilitate some of that movement, then allowing these families to go back into the larger homes, larger lot areas.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's go on to the last
Okay,
one.
the last one's just a simple change. There's really a conflict by having a planning commission member being a board adjustment in case there's an appeal and everything else. We're just saying, let's eliminate that and clean it up.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Love that efficiency. A closed session has been requested. Mr. Jones?
We had 2 items, one to do with litigation and one to do with sale of property. And so both of those are properly subject to closed meetings, so a motion to that effect would be appropriate.
Any motion? Thank you.
Not to adjourn.
Not to adjourn, to go to a closed meeting.
Thank you. Seconded by Mr. Van Buren. All in favor? And that's unanimous.